Okay, we're going to start. I'm sitting with Zvi Avidror. Tell us a little bit about where you were born, when, what your name was.
Well, as a matter of fact, even that piece is a bit of a mystery, and I'll tell you why. I was born on the 19th of April, 1925, in a little town called Arad, which unbelievably is situated in Transylvania and not at all in Israel. Arad is a very charming town, situated on the banks of a river called Marosh, where I had a fantastic childhood. We were very, very well off. My father owned the largest car agency in Transylvania, and I had a fantastic childhood, especially to the effect that I was a Hellion, and there was a Turkish fortress, part of the town, very famous one, which was ruled by a gang of officers' kids. And of course, the kids from the town and the officers' kids clashed. I was leading the town kids. We had practically weekly battles conducted with broken sabers by the officers' sons, and we used to have bones from dogs, from carcasses of dogs. That was our clubs. So as you can imagine, it was a very happy childhood, full of all kinds of deviltry. Now comes the mystery. Lately, a few years ago, I had a penchant to get hold of my birth certificate. I applied through channels and they found nothing. I'm now in touch with one of the leading lawyers in Arad, and he can't find a trace of me. So I am a bit of a mystery. And of course, I was not born Zvi Avidror. My original name is Hans Freyer. Freyer, F-R-E-I-E-R, and not Friar. But I'm still searching because I don't like mysteries, and I don't take anything for granted, and I fight to the very bitter end.
Sisters and brothers?
Pardon me?
Did you have sisters and brothers, siblings?
I have only one brother, an elder brother, whose name is David, and he lives in Haifa. And he is a retired manager of Sonol, the Stokony vacuum of all times. From Arad, due to the historical facts, 1939, Hitler is on the upsurge. My father was an Austrian national who served in the First World War's Kaiser's army as a major of artillery. And we emigrated from Arad to Sofia in Bulgaria because at that time he was part of an international business owned by his brothers and sister. And the next headquarters was in Sofia. It was quite an unbelievable sort of change for me, going from a Romanian school, which is of course Latin writing, Latin background, into a Cyrillic, Russian, let's put it that way, writing and culture, and I managed. And that's where we spent the next 4 years in Sofia. But I had one very unusual incident. I was a very, very proficient ice skater, and I won the junior championship of Bulgaria at the age of 12. And I got a decoration from the Tsar Boris II. That caught the eye of a gentleman from the German embassy, who later took me aside. And of course, with a name like Hans Freyer and the blonde with blue eyes, he was absolutely sure that I'm nothing but a bound Aryan. And he told me that, would you like to join a little group of youngsters, sort of having meetings? And I said, yes, why not? So I joined this group of kids, most of them German, and a couple of Austrians. And one day he told me, look, you have to bring some money for a uniform. So, of course, I went to my father and I said to him, look, I have to have some money for a uniform. He says, what kind of uniform? So I told him the story. Of course, I have no inkling what it was all about. So when I described to him, my father went white. So he took me aside and said, do you know who they are? I said, no, they're just nice kids and German, speaking German, which of course was my first language. Now I couldn't call it mother language because my nanny was a German girl. Arad was 1/3 German, ethnical Germans. And my father took me aside and said, try to tell me about Germans, Nazis, Hitler, which I know nothing about. To the end of the day, it transpired that for 1 week, I was a member of the Sofia Hitler Jugend. Till my father put a stop to that. Okay, times went by and 1938 came to an end, at which time the clouds were gathering over Europe. At this time, there's quite a conglomeration of refugees in Sofia. The chief of the secret police was very friendly to my father, and he advised them that the German embassy is demanding the repatriation of all citizens, of all residents of Bulgaria holding German or Austrian nationalities. I'm talking about 1939, and there was already quite known what's going to happen to such repatriates. At this time, the family had a reunion in Sofia with some of my very famous uncle and aunt who came down from Vienna.
What were their names?
The Freyer, but the Professor Feigl, who's a world-known chemist. There's a building dedicated in Jerusalem, the university in his name. And the family reunion decided they're going to all emigrate. I'm talking about now of probably October 38. They're all going to emigrate to Brazil. By dint that my uncle was so famous that the Brazilian government was very keen to give him a passport, diplomatic cover, so on and so forth. Everybody was in agreement except yours truly, and I piped up at the age of 13. Yes, I was 14 already. And I told the assembled members of the family, you can go to Brazil, but I'm going to Palestine. Eyebrows raised and questions were asked, and all looked at me very curious. They said, why? Why do you want to go to Palestine? So I showed them a little booklet which was propagated by Keren Kayemet, which showed a very nice picture of very nice youths in military formation wearing white uniforms, and the caption said, naval cadets at the naval school in Haifa. So I told my parents, this is for me. I mean, you can go to Brazil, but I'm going to Palestine. So they asked, how are you going to Palestine? I said, don't worry, I'm going to find a way. That ended the meeting of the family reunion. Of course, was the following to that, because next day my father got a cable from Geneva, which was at that time the headquarters of several Zionist organizations, but mainly the revisionists. And the then head of the revisionist movement in Europe asked my father to undertake which he called a very important mission, namely to organize an illegal aliyah, which was then at the first time that the revisionists organized an aliyah.
Growing up, was your family Zionist at all?
Yes, very divergent, very divided. As a matter of fact, every member of the family had a different denomination. I was Maccabi, my mother was Vitzo, my father was a revisionist, my uncles was, one of them was a founder of Shomer HaTzair, and the fourth one, I think was Labour. So there you have. Kol Israel. Everyone for his own self, or own belief, but of course family is family.
Was your family traditional, observant?
No, no. My mother's side, very, very much so, because on my mother's side, I'm a Wiesel. Eli Wiesel?
Sure.
Cousin. Right, so we are very, very observant on my mother's side, but not me or my mother. We were just, let's call it this way, not religious Jews. But of course, Aliyah at that time was literally saving lives. There's no question about it at all. Later history proved it. My father was organizing Ecumen, and at that time, the initial funding by the Zionist organization in Geneva went to it and hired a Greek stamp steamer, which was at that time berthed in Burgas. We owned in Burgas a refinery. I'm sorry to say, but it has to be recorded for posterity. It was a refinery for pigs' renderings, pig fat, which was, of course, the cooking oil of Europe at that time, and a very profitable business to boot. Of course, the pigs were mostly supplied by Turks, Muslim Turks, who had no problem at all raising pigs as long as it was sold to Jews, to be rendered into fat, to be sold to Christians. Absolute in the Quran, I think. So the ship was berthed in Burgas, where it was fitted out with berths and all other needs, and of course live sheep. And we sailed.
Live sheep on the ship?
Live sheep on the ship. Of course, you had to eat something, didn't you? And of course, all other food stuff needed. The captain was a real, absolutely charming pirate, all of 110 kilos, named Captain Papadopoulos, who was charming, but of course, like all Greeks, pirate at heart. And that was to be proven the next few months. We set sail.
What was the name of the ship?
Agios Nikolaos I. It's now written in the annals of the Aliyah Bet Museum at Atlit, and I provided the material. We set sail.
Do you remember the date?
In something like late February.
Of 39.
39.
Did the whole family agree to go to Palestine, or split?
No way. Everybody went to Brazil except us. And everybody did very, very well in Brazil. My aunt became a very famous millionaire. And so forth and so on. That's not part of the story. We sailed from Burgas towards Palestine, of course, at that time, going through the Dardanelles. And the ship broke down. We lay to at Piraeus, ship repairs. And then we started what literally is called mandering. Mandering is going around all kinds of places. This very clever captain found every reason in the book, and some of them not in the book, to hit every little island in the Dodecanese. So I'm very intimately connected with Chios, Naxos, Lesbos, and so on. And on the way there was food strike. He ran out of food. He asked for more money. He ran out of water, more money. And this story went on, of course, all very charmingly. At this time, my mother had the family fortune in the form of hundreds of Napoleon gold pieces sewn into a corset, which she wore at all times. Of course, somehow this charming pirate, Captain Papadopoulos, found that out, that little secret, that Mrs. Regina had the fortune in her bra. So he asked for money all the time. Of course, every time we hit some port, Father desperately cabled Geneva to no avail. There was no banking system in this Greek island. There's no way to transfer money. Of course, promises were freely given. And my father was assured that he will get every penny back as soon as we land in Palestine.
How many people were on the boat with you?
308.
308.
306 survived. 2 were killed when we landed,
Right.
which
when
will
you
come
landed.
into in a minute. So we meandered about for nearly 3 months. That was March and April and part of May. Sometimes around the 14th or 15th of May, there might have been 16th, we approached Haifa. We could see it at a distance. We were about 35 miles away. All people were sunning on the deck. We had in tow a kayak. Now, a kayak is not what you think, a little rowing boat. A kayak is a huge Greek deep-sea fishing boat made of wood. Wood and a diesel engine, a one-piston ancient diesel engine. We had that in tow as the landing boat when the steamer would reach the appointed point, which was Bet Hanan in Palestine, Moshav Bet Hanan. Of course, we were months late. We were auto-touch. We didn't have any radio communication. And we were relying on getting to a certain time, to a certain point at the beach and getting the OK light from Bet Hanan. So back again, approaching the shores of Haifa, and then I heard a hum, at which time I shouted to my father, airplanes. My father ordered everybody below deck.
Your father was in charge?
My
He was
father was
running
the commander of the ship. As again, he was a major in the K&K, horse artillery, First World War. So he was a fighting officer and very efficient in organizing. Of course, he was the commander of the ship.
What was his first name?
Jacob. So he shouted everybody below deck. So all scrambled down, hatches were battened, and two hurricanes appeared from the sky. Now it's very interesting. This is the first time I've seen a fighter airplane, a modern one in the sky, two of them. They made lazy eights and turned off and flew back eastwards. Half an hour later, I had very sharp eyes then, still have them. I saw a plum of smoke on the horizon. So I said to my father, ship approaching. Of course, they all got to the captain's binoculars. And it came up, a very beautiful sight. It was a Hunt class destroyer of the Royal Navy with a bone in its teeth. A bone in its teeth in naval language means that the ship was putting off knots and had the spray coming up from the bows. And this was a Hunt class destroyer, which was later, I found out, on immigration patrol. The decks were lined with the ship's crew, and it circled us once and hove to. Hove to means it stopped. And the captain of the destroyer hailed our captain, demanding to know who he is and where he was going. Papadopoulos tried to bluff himself out. He says, you can't ask me that, I'm in international waters. He says, you got to tell me right now, we're going to board you. So the captain told us we are, I guess they call us one, what's your cargo? He says, onions. So the British captain says, where are you heading for? Port Said. So I told him, you're on the wrong heading. So I told him the compass heading going due south. Turn around and go that way. So of course Papadopoulos agreed, and the destroyer vanished back eastwards. We sailed all night and next day and a night again. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, we saw lights on the shore, and Papadopoulos stopped the ship and says, that's Bet Hanan. Of course, no signal lights, no nothing, on the agreed pre-arrangement. And at this time, he was very determined, and he said, I'm not going to move unless you get off the boat. So my father ordered everybody to start getting into the kayak, which they did. And then the kayak approached shore. Of course, he couldn't get right to the beach, so he dropped anchor about 500 yards from shore. And we started all wedding ashore, fully clothed with the baggage. But the water wasn't very deep, at waist size. And as soon as we got to the beach, firing started. From the dunes, Arabs, of course, started firing at us, at which time my father said, everybody hit the deck and stay down, don't raise your head, and so on. And that went on till about dawn, when suddenly 2 people wandered off. They were very frightened by the firing, a man and a woman. And this woman was Hungarian of origin and was full of jewelry. She had carried all her wealth on her arms and neck. And the Arabs caught them and slaughtered them and, of course, stole the gold.
Do you remember their names?
But I forgot. I mean, some were written down in that report to the Betat Futsot. Suddenly, about dawn, there was a very pistol light which broke over us. And a very British voice said, everybody lay down and don't move. So about half an hour later, we found out we were encircled by a company of Boys Brigade. Now, those who don't know, the Boys Brigade is sort of Gadna British fashion. They were all composed of 15 to 17-year-old youngsters who were recruited into the British Army as a pre-military service, but they were behaved and dressed like military and armed, and were usually led by senior sergeants and officers. In this case, it was a sergeant and a sub-lieutenant. We were captured. My father had the presence of mind to order everybody to dig their arms into the sand, so the British wouldn't find us armed. We knew that British or Jews armed were carted off to jail. So we dug in I had a pistol, a little revolver, which I was very proud of, but I had to dig it in the sand. It's probably still there. And then the British gathered us and they agreed to hire some camels. Of course, the Arabs appeared from Gaza. We landed right on the beaches of Gaza.
Not anywhere near Beit Hanan.
No, near Bet Hanan, way, way south of Bet Hanan. There we were, middle of Gaza, all the Arabs jeering at us, throwing rotten tomatoes and eggs and cursing and spitting, whatnot. Real Arab fashion. Welcome to Israel, Palestine. And then the British allowed us to hire some camels, loaded baggage. They bought a special train to the sidings of Gaza, not to get into town. They wouldn't dare that because the population was on the streets of Gaza as usually. It's still there today, unbelievably. I'm talking about 39 May 39. So they all boarded us in the train.
They let you take all your stuff.
Oh yes, they allowed us to hire the camels. Of course, we had to pay for that. And they all trundled up to the train. We boarded the train with guards, of course. And we started off northwards toward Haifa. Of course, stopped several times in Rehovot. The whole population was at the sidings. And of course, they all boarded us and brought us food and fresh rolls, which was, of course, somebody hasn't seen a fresh piece of bread in 3 months. And of course, yogurt and lebenia and of course, oranges. Now, that was a sort of gift from heaven. And everybody was jumping for more. It was a real welcome, the first positive welcome to Palestine. Later on, the train went on to Haifa, stopped again at the sidings of Bat Galim, where there was a Bet Olim, a hostel for new immigrants. That's what we've spent the first week in Palestine.
You weren't put under arrest.
May 20, 1939.
You weren't arrested. You were just simply put on a train up to Haifa.
The British were commanding. They had armed guards on the train. They wouldn't let anybody get lost. It was a very intended bit of gentry. I mean, they were very gentle with us, but they had a purpose. Because as soon as we landed in Haifa, or Bat Galim rather, our names were registered and we were taking off the certificates. Because you don't remember, or anybody doesn't remember, it was after the white paper, and there were 100,000 so-called legal immigrants. We were first of the 100,000 to be taken off. We were made legal, issued with identity cards, Palestine, government identity cards, and we were legal. But of course, we were stuck off the immigration list. So there's 4 of us, or rather the 306 of us, less from 300 per 100,000. Bat Galim, Betolim. That's how we started.
How long did you stay in Bat Galim for?
4 days. We were gently but very firmly asked by the Sochnut to leave because they had other incoming guests and the space was limited. But in the meantime, we managed to take part in a demonstration against the white papers, which was very, very funny. Us being the first victims of white paper, us joining a demonstration against the white paper in Bat Galim.
So within the first 4 days of being in Israel, you were already out.
We were fed. We didn't get any clothes. We were gently asked to take ourselves away and find other quarters. So my mother, who was a very efficient woman, and father went and hired a flat, a 3-room flat. Of course, at that time, buying a flat was not in the cards at all. That madness came later. So she had a flat, and of course, the first thing we had to do is buy beds. You had to sleep somewhere. So my father went to a very famous bed manufacturer, a Yek, a German Jew, who made fantastic beds, and shelled out the last portion of the couple of coins left from our fortune. Mind you, we had, at that time, 1,500 pounds sterling, which was a very vast fortune. Translated in today's terms, it's like $50 million. Wow. In today's money. And of course, we started life.
What did Haifa look like at the time?
Haifa was a small, charming town. Let us say 1/3 Arab. All the lower part from Hadara Carmel was Arab. Everything over that was Jewish. I mean, Hadara Carmel, Hara Carmel, Achuz, and so on. But still a very charming town. And had, of course, portions of German, let's say, culture, the German colony.
Can you repeat this?
Pardon me?
Because of the clock. Just say a little more about, just go back for 1 second because the clock interrupted.
Yes.
Start with, it was 1/3 Arab and then...
1/3 Arab, no, let's put it this way, nearly half and half. At one time, the mayor of Haifa was Arab. The deputy mayor was always Arab. At our time, it was, I think, Khoury. So that's how we started the life in Haifa. The next portion is going to be very interesting. How do you make a living?
Great. We're going to switch tape right now.
Okay.
You're a natural.
Am I?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
What do you mean? I've had to say maybe 4 words the whole time. You can turn
You
it
know
off.
why?
Perfect. Yeah. יופי, אתה התחלת כבר נראה, לא? Okay. 1939 Haifa.
1939 Haifa. Okay, so we have beds, place to sleep. And of course, at those times, flats were rented with a stove, with an ice box. Of course, no frigidaires, and absolutely no air conditioning. That was... So the next question is food. Of course, money. Of course, jobs, non-existent. So my mother was a very celebrated cook. And she wrote at that time a cookbook, which was printed limitedly, and I can never find a copy of it to this very day.
What's the name of the cookbook?
My Kitchen.
Okay.
Now, my mother, when we lived in Arad, we had the following setup. I'm just marking this to compare to what we started off life in Palestine. She had a cook, an assistant cook, 2 maids who were also nannies, 1 driver, and a gardener. And we had 2 cars. Of course, father owned the largest car agency, so 2 cars were rule of the day. The Wayan in Haifa, flat, stove, no money, no food. So my mother looked around and she decided what this country needs is good Viennese strudels. Anybody who doesn't know what a strudel is missing best part of life. You should go to a Viennese conditorry and partake in strudel. Anyway, she decided she goes in for strudels. And she started baking strudels with filling apples and nuts and cream cheese and raisins and all that combination. And in time, cherries as well. Now, at that time, of course, cherries were easily available because the border to Lebanon was open. They used to bring in carloads of cherries. So we used to start baking strudels, nicely powdered sugar and all, and she made out 2 trays with napkins covering them. Of course, the strudel was divided into eatable portions. Then she got hold of me and my brother and gave us each a tray and told them, get on the street and start selling them. And she decided the price. I immediately rebelled. And she says, Hans, or rather Hans in my diminutive, no sale, no food. So we were deeply embarrassed, and we started going the streets, nothing but the smell did the sale. We didn't have to say a single word. The smell was killing. People absolutely cleaned up the trays in jig time. It was so fast that we rushed back with empty trays to have them loaded again with fresh strudels. And this went on for quite a time, and this is the first money we started making in this country. Then, of course, I went to the manufacturing business, me at the age of 14. I decided that what this country needs is toys for kids. At that time, toys in Israel were a very great rarity. Most of them were wooden toys from Germany. But they weren't anymore because Germany was inimical, the land of the Jews. So I started making little trains from old orange crates. I had a problem. How do I get hold of wheels? I mean, train has to have wheels. And then my mother one time, she started taking me really down, and she was about to hit me. She says, where is my broom handle? I said, what broom handle? He says, how do you think you made your toys wheels? What I did, I took a broom handle and I sew up portions of it into little wheels. I drilled a hole in the middle and had my trains going. How do how to paint them? I found that you can buy very cheaply wooden dye, water dissolved, and very great variety of colors. I used to dip the parts in, hang them to dry, and assemble my trains. I was in business. And it did well. But of course, time came around to go to school, which was actually the purpose of us coming to Palestine. So my mother took me by hand. We went up to the Hadar. We lived in downtown Haifa, now Halut Street. We went to the Technicum where the maritime school was situated, and we were presented to the commander, Commendatore Enrico Levi. late of the Royal Italian Navy. He was the commanding school in Haifa. And I was interviewed in 2 languages, some French, some German. And the commander said to my mother it was eminently suitable. But then he dropped the bombshell. He asked my mother, and how is this youngster's Hebrew? My mother said, non-existent. He doesn't know any Hebrew. So, Commandatore...
One second.
Well, this is, you see, this is the Westminster sound. I love it. So, he said to my mother, Madam, I can't accept a boy. This whole school is run in Hebrew. So, Kasfam, we went back home. What do we next? So, of course, we had a member of the family who was the right-hand lady to Henrietta Sold, Recha Freyer. And my mother called her, and I got into the youth aliyah, and I got shipped up to Kibbutz Yagur, where it was a very famous technical high school called Ludwig Tietz.
Did your brother go with you to the high school?
No, my brother went to Hachshara, I think to Bet Hanan, which was, I think, a religious town, it's a village. So that's when I started life in Palestine at that time. I went to the woodworking division. Amongst other things, I learned shipbuilding, boat building, and was very, very proficient at it. At studying, less so. And to boot, I was a hellion. I had everything that smelled of adventure, I was at it. One of my shticks, which was...
Go ahead.
Right. Ludwig Tietz at Yagur was a very high-class education institution founded by German Jews with the vote purpose of turning young Zionists into producing members of the Palestine Zionist Society. In other words, at that time, of course, the ruling crowd in this country was Mapai, and work was really a way of life. You had to work, and work was cherished. So this school, you had to learn a trade, in addition to very high-class education. There are 2 divisions, a metalworking division and a woodworking division. My best friend at that time was a chap called Uzi Glass, who later became very famous because he was Uzi Gal, the inventor of the Uzi. And I was very closely befriended with him, and we worked together in the secret underground Slick. Slick is the secret underground repository of arms in Yagur, which were later discovered by the British and cleaned out, was named the Black Saturday.
How old were you at the time that you started doing
15.
this? And was there a teacher or somebody that was responsible watching you do this?
Yes, the staff was composed of expert tutors in the trades with great educators. Nearly all of them were German, of German origin. So was the mother of the house, the Hausmother.
What was her name?
Just a moment. I'll come back in a moment.
Sure.
Sarah, right. And she was really a mother. She was in lieu of mother because I didn't see my parents sometimes on weekends. Of course, there was communication was a very difficult matter at that time. Bus services were seldom, far between. And the distance from Haifa to Yagur was something like 5 or 6 kilometers. Now I find a solution to that. I found in a scrap heap an old bicycle, which I reconditioned. And I used to trundle off to meetings that the and I became a member of the Palestine Flying Club, sometimes in late 39. And I used to ride my bicycle to Haifa to meetings and back again, which was strictly not in the books, but I did it. Of course, we were, as being in living in a kibbutz, because this school was a boarding school. You boarded in the kibbutz. You lived in the kibbutz as a kibbutz life. You had to devote some days to work in the kibbutz. Amongst other, my preferable work was at the vineyards. Of course, vineyards meant grapes. Now, as you probably know, wine is made of grapes. But of course, you have to have a press. And of course, we didn't have a press. But we very much liked to have some wine. So Yusruli invented a little gimmick how to make wine when you don't have a press. I dismantled the kibbutz dining hall. They had a sort of a hand cloths, which was not really like the usual one. It was yards long, and it was on the runner. Sure. So I dismantled it one night, got hold of 2 pieces of wood, with a load of grapes in the middle, had a sort of a tin, large tin on the floor, and 2 boys started twisting the pieces of wood. And lo and behold, the problem was that we sort of threw the towel into the dirty clothes bin, which went to the laundry. But it came out with a large red stain in the middle. Nobody could explain how it got there. But we, the boys in the game, had our little share of wine, and they couldn't find out, our teachers, how in God's name were we asleep soundly in the middle of the morning in school. So these were some of the little games we played. Of course, I had one very memorable meeting with one of the then interesting and famous people in Israel, in Palestine. We went on a school outing from Yagur by foot, I mind again, walking from Yagur to Akko. That's a 15-kilometer trek in sandals. And we visited the tomb of Baha'u'llah, the Baha'i Gardens, which of course the main tomb is in Akko. And we of course had to take the shoes off to walk into the shrine and visit her, and we came again and my sandals were gone. There I was barefooted, and we had to go all the way back to Yagur. So there was a bit of an uproar, and they asked for the gentleman who was in charge of the tomb. Later on we found that there was a very world-famous personality. He came out. He was Shoghi Effendi Rabbani. He was the head of the Baha'i faith. An absolutely charming gentleman. And he started talking to me. Well, my English wasn't that good at that time, but my French was very good. So he talked to me in French and German and held my story, and he said, well, you know, I have here a pair of old sandals that you can use going back to Yagur. So of course we went back. 3 weeks later, I was called to the secretariat of the kibbutz. They told me you have a parcel. Now in those times, to receive a parcel was an unbelievable event, because it had to be something good. I mean, you don't receive parcels, bad luck. So I fetched the parcel and we opened it. The very brand new pair of tennis shoes made by Dunlop, very famous, brand new, with a little note from Shoghi Effendi Rabbani saying, I hope this will do you some good. Throughout the years, I became very friendly with the Baha'i faith. Later in my occupation, I was advisor to the leadership in the repair and maintenance of their buildings, which was my main occupation. And I had a hand in doing the basic tenets for waterproofing the Baha'i hanging gardens in today's Haifa. All those waterfalls, I had a part in it. And I think that's one of the most beautiful assembly of people on the planet, because they are totally against wars, contention, strife. All they want in life is good. I had later meetings with them in Persia, but we'll come to that point when I'll tell you about my 4 years in Iran.
Talk a little bit more about this underground arms that you were doing.
When life started in the kibbutz after a certain time, being of a certain age, it was quite the form at that time to become a member of the Haganah. I can't remember anybody who was not a member of the Haganah at that certain age, especially in a place like kibbutz. I was inducted, and my work started, of course, the usual training and hand-to-hand combat. And I have to remind one very famous person who's not with us anymore. My hand-to-hand combat trainer was Gershon Koflin, who was a member of Kaf Gimel Yodei Asira, one of the leaders. And other members who were quite famous taught us the rudiments of armed, bearing arms, handling arms, and military behavior. The main job for the youngsters were at that time keeping and cleaning the armory and the arms. The main slick in Yagur was really a depository of a variety of small arms which every museum at that time would have been proud to possess. Later on, they were proud to possess. But at that time, it was extraordinary. They had submachine guns of every make, from Sten to Thompson guns to Suomi, Finnish submachine Schmeissers, you name it, they had it. And of course, we had to dismantle them, clean them, oil them, and so forth. And Uzi was saying, he said, Zvi, unbelievable. Everyone has one good part. None of them have all good parts. And that was really, that sentence bore the idea in Uzi's mind to design. He was an extremely proficient metalworking man, really extraordinarily gifted and capable, who could do really anything with metal. And he decided that time, so I gave him an idea. I said, why don't you put it on a blackboard, the parts that you think are extraordinary. And then wipe them off, but remember them. And he did. Later on, that became the basic idea of the Uzi.
Describe your induction ceremony. Can you describe the induction?
Yes, of course, it was the swearing in with the whole arm and the Bible, and that was part of the game, and they had to make it sort of very mysterious, and of course they had to swear on your life not to mention or divulge anything and the pain of instant punishment and so forth. But that was part of the game. The main thing was that you were doing something which you felt you were grown up. You were actually a boy living in a grown-up world. Of course, this had interesting connotations because I met several other people while living in Yagur. For instance, they had a police station which was commanded by an Arab officer who was a breeder of Arab horses. And he had next to his police station several Arab horses. And he was very friendly towards Jewish youths. He was one of the few educated Arabs who foresaw the possibility of living together with Jews in harmony. There were very few at that time.
Do you remember his name?
I remember he had three names. I remember one of his names was Hussein, but that wasn't the full name. He had three more names. He was a captain. He's quite high for a police officer, an Arab one. And it was right in the heart of Yagur, actually in a conclave. And he taught several of us to ride horses. Two of my friends were of German origin. One of his boy's father was a horse breeder in Germany, which of course this Arab officer found very interesting. So he sought to ride. Another facet was the usual way to spend a Saturday when not going to visit my parents was to climb the escarpments of the Mount Carmel, which wasn't a mean thing to do. It wasn't an easy thing at all. Climbing up the mountains to Dalia, El Carmel, or Usifia, the Druze villages, where I learned to speak Arabic. And I learned the ways of hummus and trina and other Arab delicacies, and made friends. And some of them I met many, many, many years later, like 50 years later. So that was the fashion of the life in kibbutz. Because, of course, you had some duties to perform in giving a day's work for the kibbutz, which were not exactly cherished, like working in the fields, like gathering humitzah, which is the plant that hummus is made of, which is terrible on the hands, and baling hay, and few other items not to be mentioned. Luckily, we were never allowed to the kitchen. And that's how we spent the years in Yagur.
How many years were you in Yagur?
3. But of course, that was my very satisfactory time, were the weekends or the days I could sneak off on Fridays to the Haifa Flying Club and learn to build airplanes, and then go on outings at Givat HaMoreh next to Afula and learn gliding. And then came around the certain time in 42, which was a few months short of the final day of studying and getting a diploma. And the flying club announced that the Palmach was forming a flying department and asked for members of the Haifa club to volunteer. I, without thinking and asking my parents, I volunteered. And I left Kibbutz Yagur and the school without getting a diploma, and went to the base of the Palmach Flying Division, which was called Pal Tais, at Kibbutz Sarid, where I spent my next few months, half a day gliding and half a day working in the kibbutz, as it was the usual thing for Palmachnikim to do. That lasted until a very clever British CID officer, CID means Criminal Investigation Division of the Palestine Police, had an eye on this group of youngsters at Kibbutz Sarid, who were sort of working in a kibbutz, but they had a sort of a military camp in tents, and were doing drills and all kind of things, and went off to flying at Givat HaMoreh. And this looked to him very, very unusual. But of course, he couldn't put his hands on it. There was nothing criminal we were doing. To do calisthenics in the morning, everybody had didn't have to. Some of them, some didn't, to his mind. Going out to gliding, he got a flying club. I mean, nothing wrong with that. But of course, this was war. So he looked in the war manuals, the British war manuals, and he found an article which says that any device that could be used for flying purposes can be confiscated for the duration. So one morning it turned up with 2 Black Marias. Are we going back now?
I want to go to the inspector, to Inspector Thompson.
So one day, bright morning, while we were gliding in Givat HaMoreh, 2 Black Marias trundled up. Now, a Black Maria is a huge truck which is owned by the RAF, and its purpose is to transport dismantled aircraft. It's a sort of a low bed truck with suitable partitions where you can store wings and a part of an aircraft and transport it on the road without flying it. So it trundled up 2 of them, dismantled it, presented an order of confiscation for the duration, dismantled the gliders, put them on a truck, turned them away. There we were. No gliders, no flying. No flying, no palmach. It was a terrible day for us. So back we went to camp, and then of course the commander of the course, the flying course, said, look, all the chaps who were from the palmach. You see, the group was composed of 2 sorts of people. There were real palmachniks, I mean original palmachniks from the palmach brigades, and there were members of the flying club. Now those guys from the palmach brigade just went back to their units. Now these guys from the flying club just went to their civilian lives. I was out of school, so I was went to Haifa, but being member of the Haganah, I had to present myself at headquarters of the Haifa Haganah, which was situated at the Bet Sorel Boleh. Something is going on because that's sort of
too much. Okay.
I was asked to meet a chef called Ben Dov, who was in charge of manpower in the northern area of the Haganah. And of course he was a clerk working at the Royal office as a cover. Everybody in the Haganah had a cover. And he said, look, I had something unusual for you. So he said to me, look, I want you to volunteer for the Royal Navy and get yourself transferred to the Fleet Air Arm and to get yourself into a course to learn flying on aircraft carriers. Now, mind you, you've got to realize the fact that I was 17 years old. Now, a grown-up man telling me such a thing, even to 17-year-old, it sounded a little bit, to say the least, unusual. But the manner in the Haganah was you could ask questions. You couldn't refuse an order. So I said, no, okay, I get you. Then volunteer for the Royal Navy, fine. What's this bit with the aircraft carriers? So he said a very memorable sentence, which to me looks as outlandish as it did in 1942. Mind you, again, I must point out at this point that Field Marshal Rommel was just outside of Al Alamein. The battle hasn't been fought yet. The local population, the local Haganah, was with the British consent on its toes to populate the Carmel Redoubt. The Carmel Redoubt was planned by the British as a last fortress should Marshal Rommel gain the victory and invade Egypt. Of course, that didn't come to be, luckily. But, come back to the story. So I said, what's with aircraft carriers? Now he said a very memorable sentence, which I repeat again and again. One day, we will have a Medina. And because this Medina has long shores, the best way to protect it is an aircraft carrier. Now, I didn't say another word. The only place I ever saw an aircraft carrier at that time was an atlas of the flying club. They had an atlas of aircrafts. So of course they had a description of what an aircraft is. I don't think this guy had an inkling of what an aircraft carrier is, or what it's supposed to be, what it contains, what an unbelievable effort of a ship that has a completion of between 3,000 to 5,000 airmen, costs unbelievable amounts of money, need 21 aircraft, and expert handling. So he had this outlandish idea in 1942 that we'll have a Medina, which was so far in the offing that only Messiah could have a prophet prophesied the thing. But to me, commander of manpower, Haganah, says, okay. So I joined the Royal Navy, together with my friend Sami Hershkovich, later officer. And there was an interesting incident when we joined up. 3 men stood in line. In front of me was an enormous chap with an enormous hairdo, dressed in shorts, sandals. Mind you, this was October. And a blue shirt. So he came to the recruiting petty officer, RPO in naval language. And he says, so what's your name? So he says, my name is Daniel Tillemseger. He says, what? Never mind. Your name is Timoshenko. Timoshenko at that time was a very famous marshal of the Red Army. This chap joined the Royal Navy. He went WL. He deserted 3 times. The 3rd time he was put into the Fort Ajami, the punishment barracks of the Royal Navy, where he escaped swimming across the Alexandria Bay, disappeared without trace. He later became known as Dan Ben Amotz. And he was my lifelong friend. And he couldn't travel to England for 15 years because he was deserted. He would have been arrested the first place he landed in England. He was later pardoned. The fellow behind me was also my friend, Samuel Hershkovich. And we joined up together. The day before we joined up, his father asked me to come and see him. His father was a very gentleman of serious manner, and to us in Haifa, he was a ship chandler, which was a very honorable occupation, having to deal with ships and sailors and whatnot. So he asked me in, and he was Romanian origin, and he asked me to sit down in front of him, and he poured me a little glass of Romanian brandy called Tsuika. And he sliced me, he took out another drawer, salami, which was a very sharp sausage made in Romania and Hungary, and sliced a couple of slices. Now, in 1942, you could easily find gold on the streets in salami. And I had this little glass of Tsuika, which had me spinning. And then he admonished me in Yiddish. He said to me, Herschel, he always called me Herschel, because Hans Zvi is Hersch in Yiddish. This Herschel soll Samin obhieten. I should look after Sammy. So I walked up the room, and there's Sammy in the corridor. He says, why are you laughing at? I said, you know, my father said we have a hell of a good joke. He says, what's the joke? He says, I should watch out for you. So he smiled too. It was the other way around. Then I lost sight of him. I got sent with the Advanced Naval Party, which is another story. That's how I started my life in the Royal Navy, which lasted until the end of 46. I had a very eventful service, full of adventures, Mostly not of my making, this happened. Should I go on?
Yeah.
Maybe we'll cut.
We'll cut. We'll change tapes.
Okay. Thanks.
As soon as I finished my basic training in Haifa, Haifa meant HMS Moretta, which was as you probably know, British naval usage is that every establishment is actually a ship. All establishments in the Royal Navy are always starting with HMS. That's His or Her Majesty's ship. And the storage establishment, the shore establishment, is conducted exactly in the manner of a ship, except that it's not at sea, but on land. But all manners, usages, and regulations apply to a base like to a ship. So, of course, the most important part was behavior and discipline. The British Navy is well known, at least at that time, for its cast iron discipline. In the Royal Navy, you didn't ask questions, you didn't ask reasons, you instantly acted on orders. Now, of course, English was very low on most of us, so that was the first thing we were taught. Then all manners of naval behavior, from lashing up hammocks, you slept in hammocks, at least on ships, which didn't change in Nelson's time, piping up spirits at 10 o'clock, which meant dishing out rum, a tot of rum. And then the whole life, it was all set down in regulations and punishments accordingly. When the basic training finished, which took about 3 months, we were shipped to Egypt, most of us. And I landed in a place called HMS Nile, which is a transit ship, but again a show-based establishment. And then one day, a few days later, I was called to the Master at Arms office. The Master at Arms is the highest non-commissioned rank in the Royal Navy, which actually is the master. Every ship that has a Master at Arms has actually 2 commanding officers. A commanding officer and the Master at Arms. Usually the Master at Arms runs the ship. And I was called Master at Arms office, and they said, look, in your files it says that you speak German. I said, yes. How good? I said, well, it's the first language I learned. But they didn't believe me. They asked for an officer from intelligence to come and interview me. And of course, he spoke German like he was educated in school, not real German. So I talked to him for a quarter of an hour. He says, oh, it's his mother tongue. So I was attached to a group called Advanced Naval Parties attached to the 8th Army. 8th Army was Montgomery, Alamein. This was after Alamein, of course. And we started trundling up the coast of North Africa, going to every port, Dercha, Barne, Messa, Matruch, Tobruk, on the way to Benghazi and Tripoli. In Tobruk, I had a very unusual experience, which very few people in history had such an experience. Back in the times when I was at school in Yagur, my holidays were spent working. I had to add to the family income. And one of the jobs I found was at the Augen shipyards in Haifa. At that time, they were building evasion boats. And I was working, constructing them. The word went around, the Arab students, they said, Hada Shad Tobruk in Arabic. That's for Tobruk. Of course, this was a disaster, as late it came to be. Because when they actually did the invasion of Tobruk with the boats that I built, the Germans knew all about it and slaughtered them. slaughtered them to the last man. There were 200 Royal Marines lost there. The boats were shot to pieces. And that's when I found in December, when I got to Tobruk, the remains of my boats on the beaches of Tobruk. A very sad experience. Then on to Benghazi, where I spent a year. I was working on MTBs, motor torpedo boats. I supervised building a jetty for the invasion of Sicily. And I put together the first radar dome in the Middle East history, on top of the tower of the Banco Italiana, which was supposed to help the invasion of Sicily. Later I was drafted. In the Royal Navy, when you posted from one ship to the other, it's called a draft. I was back at Nile, and I was going to, of course, Fleet Era. Of course, all this time I was doing what I was asked to do by the Haganah, get in the Fleet Era. Not they, not I, had an inkling of idea what it meant to get to a Fleet Era. Now, the Royal Navy is known as the senior service. The most senior service in the senior service is the Fleet Era. At that time, the Fleet Era was composed of no less than 59 aircraft carriers. Today, the Royal Navy has not one. There are two of them mothballed. So to get into that was strictly accorded to Englishmen, New Zealanders, and Australians, and some Canadians. I never met a South African, never met anybody else, or Rhodesian, anybody else but those three denominations. But the Royal Navy had one rule. You could post the requests once a week. So I posted the request to the commanding officer, asking for one thing only, to be drafted to the Fleet Era. It took me 2 years. Finally, I was told later on that the chaps at the Admiralty at Ras Al Tin, which is in Alexandria, decided we have to get rid of this pest from Palestine. The only way to get rid of him is transfer him. They did. My transfer came through. Then I was drafted from Benghazi to Fleet Era, but via Nile. That was the usual way things were conducted in the Royal Navy. So I was stationed at HMS Nile, and the paperwork usually took at least 2 weeks, 2 months, in the middle of the war. Paper was running the war, not arms. And one day I saw a notice board on the Master at Arms office, who was a very, very clever chap, who had one motto in his life: idle people are bound to cause trouble. So he posted a volunteer list. Anybody could volunteer for the following items, and that was, of course, conducting. When you volunteered for somebody, you got something in return, more leave or even more pay or something like that. So one of the jobs that were offered was replacement dispatch rider. Now, DR, or it was known in that language, Don Roger, meant you got a military motor bicycle. You had a job to do, which usually meant transferring the paperwork of the base to the Admiralty in Ras Al Tin, which meant riding along the Corniche of Alexandria. Now, the Corniche Alexandria looked exactly like one in Tel Aviv, except that it curved for 4.5 kilometers. That meant the yearly stint of taking the bike to road 8 o'clock in the morning, getting there at 8:30, having a royal breakfast at the Admiralty, and coming back. Of course, you had this satchel with the papers chained to your wrist, and there's a leather chapel, a military leather shuttle, and very serious, and all it had is the completeness of the base and the food requirements. But somehow this thing that went off daily at the same time caught the eye of the Muslim Brotherhood, which at that time was in revolt. They were bent to get the British out of Egypt. And they did all kinds of attacks, assassinations and whatnot. So at that time, they decided that this dispatch rider contains all the secrets of the Royal Navy, and we have to get them, brother. I found that out later from the CID. Anyway, I was riding along, minding my own business, and suddenly this 1,500 truck, sort of a small truck, came barreling out of a side street and ran me on my left side. Of course, I went flying the motorcycle the one way and the other way, and I landed on my back. I didn't lose consciousness, and I was looking at my feet, and I saw my left leg had the heel up. And I thought to myself, that's a very funny to have your knee. And I tried to move my leg, and I screamed with pain, because I had a broken, completely broken left femur. And I had a terrible wound on my upper right leg. And I was lying on my back. Suddenly, two Arabs sidled up and tried to get the satchel away from me. They couldn't because it was chained. Then one of them took a look at my shoulder patch, which said in English, Palestine, in brackets, Aleph Yud, Yud, Palestine I. That's the way we were able to denominate where we came from, because the Australians had it, New Zealanders had it, Canadians, and so forth. So one Arab looked at it, they tried to snatch the strap, and they couldn't because it was chained to my wrist. And suddenly one Arab says to the other, Isma hada tabana, in Arabic. He says, look at him. He's one of ours. At this time, Royal Naval Major, Royal Engineer Major was passing by. He took out a revolver and aimed at the Arabs, and they took to their heels. Then he came to me and looked at me, and I asked him a very unusual question, because I felt with my hands that are fully bloody. I said, please look at my jewels are in place. He says, don't worry, son, you'll have grandsons yet. Then he asked for an ambulance, and I was taken to hospital where I spent several months on my back. And then a final day when I got out, this welfare officer of Royal Navy came along to interview me. And he said to me, but you know, I have to declare you unfit for service and get you off the Royal Navy. So I said, a very crestfallen face, he says, why? Don't you like to get out into civilian life? He says, no. I told him, look, my life's quest is just at hand. I was transferred to the Fleet Iran. Well, he said, you know something? If you sign a waiver, I'll give you a month's leave in Palestine to recuperate. And then you can start your life in the Fleet Iran. Which I signed that paper. That paper is worth in today's money close to £1 million sterling in back pay. But I don't know if I regretted it, because the best portion of my service started then and then. Came back from vacation, from recuperation, and started my life with HMS Grebe. That was the Royal Naval Air Station at Dekela in the Alexandria Bay. I was the only Jew, the only Israeli to serve there for nearly 2 years. I had a very happy time there. And of course, I never relented and kept putting in a request to be posted to flying duties. And again, the same thing, like persistence. At the end of the day, they agreed, but they had a problem. The war was nearly over. But then came VE Day, and the British at that time sent most of they were clearing off Egypt. So they start sending home, or demobbing, all people they didn't think they were necessary. And most of the air crew, especially the one portion which they didn't think was any more necessary, air crew members called TAGs, telegraphist air gunners, who were the third party of a crew of a biplane known as the string bag or a fairy swordfish. That left aeroplane, pilot, but no radio operator. They finally consented and sent me to Royal Air Force Base at Faid in the Canal Zone, where I passed the flying test radio man's course. And I started flying with 775 Squadron on a twice weekly stint.
What year was this in? What year was this in?
This was 45 already. Going into 46. I got demobbed in August 46. That has another story about my demob and the closure of HMS Grebe. Anyway, the leg usually started, we took off from Alexandria, landed at Tel Aviv, Ekron at that time, took off, landed at Ramat David, took off and landed again at Beirut, from thence to Akrotiri, Akrotiri in Cyprus, and Alexandria.
How long did the route take?
The whole trip, about 6 hours. But it wasn't a day's work. I mean, we started early at 7 o'clock in the morning, back at base for tea. I was at that time, my main occupation was, I was in charge of workshops, maintaining aircraft which were mostly wooden, like Martinets, and so on. I was very well in with the management of the commanders of the base, especially they had a commander called McCausland, who was a Fleet Air Arm senior pilot, Scots of origin, very educated, an extremely personable person. And we were very friendly despite the enormous differences in both age and ranks. But he sort of saw my capabilities. And one day I was on leave in Palestine. And this was something like June 46. No, sorry. It was probably May 46. And suddenly in the morning, about 8 o'clock, there's somebody knocking on the door. My mother went to open the door. There was two Royal Naval policemen in the door. And they said, is Hanny Fryer around? So my mother said, I'm going to take a look. So she went to my room and she said, Hansi, have you done something very wrong? I said, no. There's two military policemen at the door. You must have done something wrong. Oh, I'm going to go and see. So I pulled my shorts on, went to the door. I said, you Petty Officer Fryer? I said, yes. Well, listen, come with us. We have a plane waiting for you at Haifa Airport. I said, what? He said, we have a plane waiting for you for Haifa Airport. You got orders to return right away to Grebe. I told him, I'm just starting my leave. I have 2 weeks leave. Never mind, here's the orders. So I started putting on my uniform and started packing. He says, we don't have time, leave the case.
No, you're good.
Cut.
Got.
Father, girlfriends, and then you're being called back to the boat.
To what?
To the boat. They came, not military police came to take you to the airport.
Took you.
Okay.
Let's start this way. You mentioned that you were home on leave.
Well, finish with the military police bit? No. Go back to father?
Tell me about your father.
Okay. Now, when my mother started her let's call private cake manufacturing, my father went to look for work. So before we came to this country, after my father closed down the in 29, in 32, the car business, they went to and they established the family, the biggest fruit and fresh fruit exporting business in Europe. It was called Continental Fruchtunion, and it transported to Western Europe the fresh fruit produce of Bulgaria, Romania, Yugoslavia, and Italy. Just to make a point, in fact, at the heyday, we were exporting something like 700 tons of fresh strawberries from Bulgaria with no refrigeration cars to Western Europe. If anybody has an inkling what that means, believe me, it was a fantastic bit of organization, with cars having ice blocks for cooling. Anyway, one of the main businesses was my father's citrus business in Sicily. Years later, it was still known as the merchant who acquired citrus for export, especially blood oranges of Sicily. When we came to Palestine, my father went to look for work. So, of course, he went to the agricultural division of the Sokhnut. And they told him, strawberries, we're not interested in strawberries. That's a little gimmick that the Yekes in Naharia grows. We are not interested in that. Of course, he was about 20 years premature. Then he told them, look, I'm quite knowledgeable about blood oranges. I said, no, we know everything to know about oranges. That was part of the syndicat. So my father went to work. They told him, look, they need storekeepers in the Navy. So he got accepted in the Royal Naval Torpedo and Mine Depot in Haifa Bay as assistant temporary storekeeper. But at the end of the war, he was the chief storekeeper, mines and torpedoes, Middle East. That's the portion of my father's starting his life in Israel, which lasted, of course, till the end of the war, 45. Of course, then the whole thing closed down and he started something new. Girlfriends? It was a very difficult portion of life for those who were in a kibbutz, where most of the kids were sabras, who led a very close society, and the newcomers, the new immigrants, ha'olim, who had very little Hebrew, had very foreign mannerisms, were very, very much kept away, and especially from the female side. Now, when you look at youngsters between the ages of 15 and 17, 18, which, of course, the chromosomes were dashing about in their bloodstreams and looking at girls which were unavailable stars in the heaven, you had to find something somewhere. Well, looks helped. I have to, at this time, mention one incident which is very much imprinted in my mind, in Haifa. I was on a weekend. There was an open-air cinema called Ora in Haifa. And I went there at the matinee. And I sat there. I was wearing shorts, of course, shirt, as usual, sandals. And there was plenty of room because Friday afternoon matinees were not very well attended. And suddenly there was this young lady came sit down next to me. And the film started. And I suddenly felt her left hand on my knee, slowly working itself up. So, of course, I got the inkling right away. I looked at her. She was smiling. And she had a bag of nuts. She offered them to me. Of course, peanuts at that time were in the shell. You had to unshell them yourself. One thing led to another. End of the show, she says, can I buy you a piece of cake? I said, yes. Well, let's do it in comfort. To cut a long story short, took me her home. She was a married woman. I was 16. She was 29. We had a hell of a session, and this went on for months. Every time I got to Haifa, all I had to do, she had a phone, very unusual. Her husband was the general civilian paymaster of the British forces Levant. He was most of his time on the road. He was standing along the brigadier general, who was the paymaster, going around the various British establishments, paying off salaries with an armored guard and an armored car and so on. He was most of the time on the road. I never saw him. This thing went on for months. Of course, I had the time of my life because anybody who knows anything about that, a 16-year-old with a hungry 29-year-old is the best match in the world.
Do you want to tell us her name?
Clara.
Clara?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't think her family name was put in print.
Okay.
She was of Austrian origin, very, very good looking, and with the attached looks to it. All this went on fabulously until one morning about 5 o'clock. She heard, well, you both heard a car approaching. Now, I want you to know that this time, it was 1941, a private car driving along at that time, and that was the most unusual thing, a private car, not a military car. Petrol was very strictly rationed. Only very few people got petrol rations unless were employed by the British or the forces, what his husband was. Anyway, to cut a long story short, his officer got sick. They had to be taken immediately to the Italian hospital, and her husband had a very unusual vacation. Of course, he didn't phone his wife at 5 o'clock in the morning. He just drove up. She was very much, on the spot. She was living at the first floor. Ground floor, first floor. Luckily, it was the second or third floor. That saved my life, probably. She grabbed my clothes, she opened the window, and she said, "Zvi, jump out right away." And I, without thinking twice, I jumped. Luckily, there was this box bush right under the windows. I landed on top of it, got all my legs cut, bleeding like a pig, but I was in one piece and I could run. I was, of course, in my shorts, my undershorts. So I ran like the devil and walked all the way down from Mount Carmel to where we lived in the new commercial center in Haifa. I couldn't explain to my mother. I told her all kinds of stories that I fell off the road and got amongst the bushes and all kinds of, because he didn't believe a single word of it. But she put some iodine on it, and I screamed like a pig. And that wasn't the end of that portion of my romance. Of course, I found other portions of romance. Oh, and unbelievably, most of them were married women. Why, I don't know. And that was my first and most telling romance in Israel. And I had many more. I don't think we should spend time on because we're going to be here for ages.
Let's move back to the military police coming to the door in
military
Haifa.
police grabbed me as I was down to Haifa airport, and there was Jock, my pilot, with a swordfish, and he said, "Chippy, hop in. You got yourself royal treatment, special flight to the base." So I didn't know what it is. I got myself buckled in, put my, connected up my intercom to it, and we took off right away. And I said, "Jock, what's going on?" He says, "You've been elected. You got a very special bit of duty to do, and McCausland is going to treat you royally," and said no more about it. Well, an hour and a half later on, we landed in Alexandria at the base at the HMS Grebe, and right away I was tunneled to McCausland's office. And he said, "Listen, Friar, we are cleaning the base. I got a special job for you. You are to dismantle, crate the remaining 2 squadrons, and you can have anything you want." That was an unbelievable undertaking because anybody who knows anything about this, to dismantle 24 aircraft and build wooden crates to handle the parts, the wings and the fuselage, and then get them onto the illustrious, which was called in for that purpose, and bring the whole lot to Malta was a no mean undertaking. And all this why? Because at this time, Britain sent on DMOB most of the aircrew. There were very few pilots left, not enough to man all the aircraft, certainly. And that was the rule of the day. Also, they didn't need the aircraft in flying condition. They were going to mothball them. So McCausland told me, "You can have anything you want." And I said, "Why was I elected? This was an officer's job. I was that well in with McCausland." He said, "No. First of all, you're a shipwright. Second of all, you speak Arabic. Third, you know your way about it. For me to bring in somebody from outside take me months to get him into things. So you can open book." So I hired the 140 Egyptian carpenters, aircraft fitters, who all worked before that at Misr Air, and started round-the-clock work. He was given 3 months. I finished the stint in 5 weeks. And of course, that the illustrious came in, we got everything aboard, and off she went to Malta, and I got back, instead of 2 weeks leave, I was given a month's vacation in Israel. And then, of course, a couple of my girlfriends weren't too happy to see me again. At this time, I had several. And that sort of brought me to nearly the end of my service, because when I got back from vacation, I was called into McCausland and I told, "Look, we are clearing the base." What happened before that? During the time I was on vacation, which is called the Navy on leave, the Arab terrorists, the Muslim Brotherhood, whom I had such very unfortunate intimate knowledge, decided to do a major coup and went into a officers' brothel in Alexandria called the Carlton Hotel and murdered 21 officers at night. They slit their throats in bed. Of course, standing there was prostitute to skedaddle. They were all Arab girls, so they were spared. And that was a very major shock to the British. And right back to Whitehall. And the order was given to clear Egypt and concentrate in the canal zone. Canal zone means all the bases along both sides of the Suez Canal. And of course, we got the high sign to get out. And of course, the Egyptians were all this time demanding the return of HMS Grebe or the Kela, which was their main, Mr. Air's main base in Egypt. So I was given the unbelievable duty. Of course, the British were planning a sort of slap in the face to Egyptians. They were trying to get some way back a little bit of their pride, to show the Egyptians who is really boss. So they cleared everything. I was given the job to, unbelievable, because looking back at that time, I was a petty officer, which had 2 ranks going up, or 3 ranks going up to an officer, which is comparable to us to a sergeant major or rassam in Hebrew. But I had the ability, and I could speak Arabic, and I could handle them. Anyway, I was asked to declare anything unfit on the base and scrap it. And I scrapped a lot of things which I then transferred to the Haganah, like signaling equipment, and I had one bomb detonating device from afar by radio, which was very handy. The only one we had.
How were you in touch with the Haganah throughout this time?
When I was stationed in Benghazi, I had a friend who was the head of the Haganah division in the Royal Air Force. He was named Avrash Argaman. Later, Alon. And I had a very interesting bit of action with them in Benghazi, while I was stationed in Benghazi. It was a very worth telling because it's the first time I'm telling the story. It was buried for all time. I didn't even put it in writing. I'm now putting it in writing.
You start the story now?
Yes.
So
I have all the time you need.
It's fine.
Because I have nothing to do today.
It's fine.
Except at 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock, my wife comes. At 7 o'clock, we're going to change command of her commanding officer at Tel Aviv. Until 6 o'clock, I'm your prisoner.
That's good to know.
Willing.
We will be out of here before 6.
No,
But-
look, you can come back later. You can come at midnight and we go on, or tomorrow morning. Dvora.
Benghazi.
Benghazi.
Benghazi was, of course,
No, you have to be straight. Like you've been before. That's clear. Okay. Yeah.
Benghazi was an Italian town. Very modern, very Italian. And that was the Royal Naval Air Base Benghazi was situated. Its main purpose at that time was to make preparation for the invasion of Sicily. It was also the home base of the Jewish Brigade, 2nd Battalion. Anyway, I got on very well with the British. Usually I got on very well because I can make myself, let's put it this way, accept British ways. I could drink with them, I could joke with them, and it's most important, the British, which is unbelievable considering the fact that we were in a major war, a very cruel world war. Sports for the British were paramount, of unbelievable importance. They would forego for the sake of sports many things, and they did. Well, later on when we come again to the Kela, to HMS Grebe, I'll tell you about that. Anyway, I made friends there, and especially friends with a couple of French underwater demolition experts who, or divers, who were stationed in Benghazi because there was there was a British ammunition ship sunk in the Benghazi harbor, and next to it there was a Nafi ship. Nafi mean anything to you? Nephi was Naval Air Force Canteen Service, Hashekem of our forces. So, with the Frenchman, of course, I speak a very passable French. We got on very well. And they told me about their work, this ammunition ship, which was full of mostly small arms, with crates of Tommy guns. And I had my eyes blinking. And then they told me about this Nephi ship next to it, from which they sort of broke into, that wasn't their job at all, and started hauling out bottle by bottle scotch. Now, a bottle of scotch whiskey at that time of the game, I'm talking in terms of 1943, would have bought you anything in the Royal Navy. So I told him, these guys, look, what you're doing is, peanuts. It's a small business. Let's do it in a big way. So I came up with the idea of this. They're going to get out 1 crate of whiskey, which was 6 bottles. And they're going to get out 2 crates of Tommy guns, which had 3 Tommy guns to a crate, that's 6 Tommy guns. And the deal was this, how to get it out of Benghazi Harbor. Now, Benghazi Harbor was guarded by the Royal Sudanese Camel Corps, which was a very tough unit manned exclusively by Sudanese Arabs, who took their job very seriously, searched every car coming out of the harbor, including officers' cars. They opened bagage boots, what have you. One of the transport companies, the Jewish transport, the 405, was stationed in Benghazi, and their job was to bring fresh water, the only fresh water available at that time in Benghazi. The well was in the harbor of Benghazi. So they used to come in with their water trucks, fill them up with water, and distribute them to units which didn't have running water. So I cooked up the idea of taking a couple of these trucks at certain places in the Royal Engineers where we had Israelis or Jews, and cut off the bottom part of the tank, make a double tank, and that's what we did. We loaded up these cases of whiskey, the Tommy guns, and this went up for weeks, till I think I counted about 15 crates of Tommy guns out, a suitable amount of whiskey. That was then smuggled in the same way to Palestine. The whiskey, of course, went to the Frenchmen, which made very good use of it. In later years, when I had this terrible battle at Bet Najada in Haifa, where I was leading the charge of this fortress in the middle of the Arab town, I was dreaming, where was a Tommy gun? What I had was a Czech rifle, very unsuited for fighting in one's buildings, in built-up areas. That was, of course, under the tutelage of this friend of mine, Avrasha Avraham. Avrasha Trainis was his name. Avrasha Trainis, sorry. He later changed it. Anyway, that time, through him, I got all this equipment from HMS Grebe. And then came the final day, the handing over to the base. Now, the British decided to hand the Egyptians a slap in the face. They advised the Egyptian Admiralty that the base was going to be returned to them on a certain day, and they should send somebody to accept the keys. Now, the Egyptians, I found out later, had this idea that it's going to be a big parade with an admiral in attendance and so forth and so on. The British had different ideas. They dismissed all the British personnel. I was given for one day the right to wear three golden buttons. 3 golden buttons in the Royal Navy is Chief Petty Officer. Still a petty officer, not an officer. As an honor guard, I got our guards. Our guards were composed entirely of officers from Anders' army, Anders' Polish army, in their funny five-cornered hats. They were all above the rank of captains, major, and they had a colonel in command with a saber. So this Sunday morning approached. I paraded them in front of HMS Grebe. I had the gates locked. I had the key in my hand. I was awaiting the arrival of the Egyptians. A small Austin 6 trundled up. There was a lieutenant in the front seat driving, and the commander at the back seat, an Egyptian. The car stopped. The lieutenant got out. He was full of fouragerie, you know, golden braid and emblems and decorations. He must have been short of 20, and I was wondering where he got all these medals from. The Egyptians weren't in the war at all. And if they were against the British. So he comes out, opens the door for the Commodore. The Commodore puts one foot out and he looks at me and says in Arabic to the lieutenant, very angry, هذا مش ضابط. تمسك المفتاح منه. He said to him, he's not an officer. You take the keys from him. Because he saw me in my 3 buttons. And he shut the door again. So I called my guard of honor to attention, all these Polish officers. I saluted this lieutenant, handed the key, asked please sign on the dotted line. I had a form there, 1 Royal Naval Air Base HMS Grebe received by the Egyptian Navy signed. And he signed it, and he didn't say a word, went back to the car, drove off. I dismissed the Polish officers. I had my bags packed. I went straight to the railway station, got on the train to Haifa. The next day I left the Navy.
What was the date?
And that was something that I remembered my dying day, the face of that Egyptian Commodore, who was livid. He was black with rage, and he couldn't do anything about it. So then I got back, and I was sent to Sarafend, Tzrifin in our language. And I got out, this was in end of August. I got a British tailored suit, shirts with detachable collars, tie, a trilby hat, and a raincoat, end of August. And a pair of shoes, and I was out of the Navy. So back I went to my parents' home at Haifa and started to look at civilian life. First of all, after taking it easy for a few weeks, I had to look for a job. I was at that time, let's see, 21. At 21, I had one thing advantage. My parents were very liberal. They were running a pension. And I had the little room downstairs, sort of a garçonnier, with a separate entrance, 2 floors down. Nobody knew what I was up to, and I was up to it all the time, most of the time. Girlfriends coming in and out. And I looked around what to do. So I had this friend from school days in Yagur, from Tietz, called Harry Rosenheck. Later on, Zvi Rotem, who was a very gifted woodcarver and designer. And we decided to go into the furniture design business. And we opened a bureau for designing shop outfittings and furniture and so on. And we did quite well. And of course, we had a little corner there for secret stores for the Haganah.
Within your shop?
In our shop, in our office. Sort of a cupboard, which looked like a cupboard, but had double backs. And most of it was hand grenades. Anyway, the time went by, and then suddenly it was November. And the state was established, pronounced. And it took only 3 days. 3 days later, I was given a little bit of paper by a young boy, and I was told to take up the position in Lower Haifa town, the position of the Haganah, which was right next to the Arab quarters, actually fronting the Arab quarters, and it was situated in a brothel. At the top floor of a brothel, and of course it was the safest place on earth, because this was a special brothel for higher police officers and CID, who didn't dream of searching their own building. How would they come to the idea that the Haganah would have the area command office in the top floor? It had a separate staircase. That was the whole idea.
November 29th, do you remember where you were?
Remember 29th?
When you
I
heard-
was at home. We were all glued to the radio, of course. Everyone who had a radio. And if didn't have a radio, he walked to someone who had a radio. And of course, all had bits of paper. We were all writing down the counting. We were crossing off the fives, in groups of 5. And suddenly we had a Medina, and then everything erupted. And everybody rushed down. And it was unbelievable, the spontaneous eruption of this joy. Of course, nobody thought of what's going to come next, what's going to happen tomorrow. But the unbelievable joy, we had the Medina. They all rushed to the streets. They all started dancing like mad. Chorus and music, and whoever had anything to drink brought it along. And it was one great eruption of joy that went on all night. Next morning, the firing started.
And then 3 days later, you found yourself.
And 3 days later, I took up this job of commanding that area of Lower Haifa town, bordering Jaffa Street, in that brothel, which had a very great demand that was in and out all the time. And we were safe as churches because the British never thought of looking for us there. Of course, later on they evacuated the place because the firing started. The Arabs started firing from Jashri upwards towards us. The British didn't feel like they were going to stand in the middle. So they left the brothel. I mean, they didn't frequent it anymore, but the girls stayed there. And this went on. That was when the Pluga Aleph, the A company, was formed in Haifa. I have to remind you that this time there was no standing army. There were just the Haganah people who were actually not fully recruited. The only people fully recruited were Palmachnikim, who were Palmachnikim in the various brigades. But the Haganah people were in the civilian life to be called up when necessary. This one was necessary. So the first group was composed mostly of students from the Technicum and Haganah members who had military training. Of course, preferred was ex-servicemen like myself, who after all, for nearly 5 years were in a military framework, knew small arms and discipline and so on. So from there I was given another gizra, or area, much hotter than this one, on the Hechalutzim Street in Haifa, facing the Arab Burj, and that was constant firing across streets because one street was occupied by us, the other street was occupied by Arabs. I had the company with me, 11 boys, all armed, and we were occupying the top floor of a building. And of course, anything was going on, like any unusual happening, we had observers, and we hid our arms under the beds, under the mattresses. And one day, we were given the call that the kalaniot arrived. Now, kalaniot means poppies, red poppies. This was the denomination for the parachute brigade, the British parachute brigade, which at that time was stationed in Palestine. And it was a very, very tough outfit, having come through Second World War with great losses. Remember Arnhem. And they were given the job of keeping the Jews down. And this company took our street and occupied the street and went from house to house. And then they charged into our building and they ran upstairs, and there was this corporal who was shouting, "I'm gonna murder you bastard Jews. You murdered my mate, you hung him, and I'm gonna kill all of you." And he was using all the swear words that the English swear words known. And he had really blood in his eyes. And he had his stomach gun cocked, finger on the trigger. And I was standing on the top of the stairs with 3 of my boys. In the meantime, his soldiers were fanning around in the various rooms and found all our arms. So he had a bona fide case. And he was really livid, and I knew he was going to pull the trigger. So I screamed at him, "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the ex-party officer of the Royal Navy." I said, "I'm an ex-party petty officer of the Royal Navy. You tried to shoot me?" In my best English. "You bastard," and so on. So he was very taken aback. He couldn't believe his eyes. So he took his finger off the trigger and he says, "Are you English, mate?" I said, "No, I'm a local boy." He says, "Where are you English from?" So I told him. He said, "I'm sorry, boys, but you're under arrest." And he literally saved my life, because this guy was absolutely bananas. He was living mad. His friend was a corporal that the Etzel got hold of and hung him. You remember that thing that they hung several sergeants?
What was his name?
Huh?
Do you remember his name?
No. Not even the press remembers the name of the 2 sergeants. So this corporal was really livid. But what he did, he took us all, they handcuffed us and put us aboard a truck. And he drove through all the Arab Burj at slow pace, very slowly. And we were pelted and rocked and whatnot by the Arabs. And he then took us down to CID headquarters in Lower Town, in Haifa. And we were jailed. And a week later, we were put before a military tribunal at Tira. Tira was one of the main British forces camps outside of Haifa. And we were sentenced to 4 years in jail. Possession of arms. And while waiting transfer to the Akko prison, we were imprisoned in the Haifa police station on Hadara Carmel. And I must say, for that 2 weeks I was in jail there, I had a fantastic life, because at that time girlfriend was a divorced girl, 28 years old, of Viennese origin. Her name was Rosie, and she was the head waitress of the Atara Cafe in Haifa, which was the gathering ground of all the Palmachniks and Haganah men. And every day she used to send one of her waitresses with a tray of cakes and coffee to the jail. And the jailers, the chief jailer was a British sergeant. And he sort of became friendly with us because of the cakes and the coffee, naturally. Anyway, a very famous lawyer who was really knowledgeable from Haifa, and his name was, I'll remember it in a minute, sorry, went before the British appeal board and told them that you can't sentence ex-petty officer who had an exemplary conduct sheet to jail. So I'm asking him to consider that. So they released me on good conduct for the duration. Of course, good conduct means nothing, because 7 months later, the British quit Palestine, and there I was. Hotter Ben Ishai was the name of the lawyer. Hotter Ben Ishai, very famous, very capable, and he got me off jail. The rest were sent to Akko, the boys in my company, but they were always released later. That came sort of the start of my certain, it wasn't life. It was constant fighting from the end of November, daily, on a daily basis. Of course, this company then expanded into a platoon, and more people were added, and eventually it became the 22nd Brigade of the Carmel Army. Moshe Carmel was the brigadier. This group led most of the fighting in and around Haifa. And when I mean fighting, this was on a daily basis. We went every day out to a different portion of Haifa to fight the Arab regulars. It was the fight for the possession of Haifa, nothing less, the preliminary ones. And of course, it wasn't only Haifa, it was fights at Tyre. Then at that time, the brigade commander was a very famous man who then became chief of the Israeli army. And he planned a first planned real military action in the War of Independence. And it was the result of the Arab closure of the road from Tel Aviv to Haifa at what it was called the Little Triangle. At Zichron Yaakov, Igzim and Razal and Tuba. His name was Motke Maklev, who later became chief of staff, but at that time he was the brigadier of the Carmel Brigade. And he planned a night military action of quite difficult complexity, and it was executed to perfection. We were to take off in 3 companies from Zichron Yaakov to march at night, capture the 3 Arab villages, eliminate all the Arab fighters, destroy their ammunition if they had any, and retreat back to Zichron. I had in my command a company, and I had the one of the 3 3-inch mortars, which were later proved not to be needed. And before we marched out, Motke Maklev came up to me and said, Zvika, you don't come back without the tube. In Hebrew, tzinor. Now, to carry this load, a 3-inch mortar is a very heavy piece of equipment, and the plate even heavier. I was given a white mule, known as the athlete mule. They were a huge animal, very docile, very easy to lead, and were used to carry vast loads. Well, we took off, we marched, we got to the villages, we surprised them. Arabs don't really like to fight at night. We conquered the villages, we eliminated them, and we started marching back. At this time, an Arab was laying on one of the flat roofs of the buildings, and he had a 10-gauge, 1-barrel shotgun of ancient make with ancient bullets. I mean birdshot, tiny birdshot. So when we were marching away, he let loose, and I got this load up my backside. Of course, I felt like kicked by a mule. I put my hand back, it was full of blood. But I could walk, so I kept marching on. And then, unbelievable thing happened. It started raining hail. It started raining hail the size of pigeon eggs. We got really clobbered. what saved us that most of us were knitted caps. But the one who didn't wear a knitted hat was my mule. This mule got hit by hail, got so enraged, he just curled his back, lifted all four legs in the air, the tube flew on one side, the plate on the other side, the mule disappeared. I never saw him to this very day. There I was, in the middle of a hailstorm, 2 kilometers from Zichron, a tube and a plate. So I decided the plate can be collected next day. I asked 2 boys to carry the tube, and we got back to Zichron, all in one piece. And I was trundled down to hospital by my first session at Hospital Borochov on Mount Carmel. And of course, next morning, the nice young nurses had a hell of a session. All the 4 young nurses kept relieving each other, picking up by a pincet the birdshot from my backside and plunking it into a tin receptacle every time it said ping. And another girl took a run at it. And this went on for hours. The head nurse came on and says, okay, finish with this circus there. Get off and I'll do the rest. And they all said, oh, the old bitch wanted a piece of this lovely ass herself. That was my first wound. And of course I got a week later back to action because that wasn't serious enough. And then we had the unfortunate experience of Ben Ami. Now, Ben Ami was a commander of the Nahariya Brigade. Nahariya was the most northerly and exposed settlement bordering on Lebanon, and in first line of Kauji's fighters. Kauji was a leader of the Arab Irregular Army, which he called the Army of Yarmouk, which was situated in Lebanon and kept us harassed by all kinds of actions, run and fight and run away, sort of. But of course, Nahariya was the base to holding up against him. Next to Nahariya was a couple of kibbutzim, Sasa, and it was under siege by the Arabs, encircled, without food, without water. So the commander of the area, called Ben Ami, decided to organize a relief column, which was later to be called Shayarat Ben Ami. It was composed of fighters, all armed, and a company of girl soldiers. And he marched off at dawn towards Sasa.
You were with him?
No.
Okay.
I was at this time stationed with my platoon at the Tel Hotel on Mount Carmel, which was our base. I'm recounting history. This column was ambushed by Arabs because, of course, their spies, mostly British policemen, told them all about it. The column was ambushed very successfully, cut off, and all of them massacred. The girls were first raped and mutilated and then killed. That left Nahariya without a single fighting man. This was, of course, a very grave situation because the Haganah command knew that if Kauji gets hold of this piece of news, he's going to march there unopposed. So in the middle of the night, I think it's about 4 o'clock in the morning, we got woken up, all armed, marched down to Haifa harbor. We got onto a tug and sailed towards Nahariya, seawards. I had a very capable machine gunner with a Bren gun called Avram Karasanti, and I stationed him in the bow of this tug under a blanket. And we were sailing towards Nahariya, skirting Akko. Akko was then occupied by Arabs. Later on, my brigade, the 22nd Brigade, captured Akko at a later action. But at this time, we were sailing past it, still manned by Arabs, who had their guns trained at us. So I tell Davremele, when we passed the promontory of the Akko fortress, next to the Migdalor, they just lift the blanket for a moment, let them see the brain gun. So the Arabs thought the better of it, let us pass. And then we landed in Nahariya. The whole little town was on the beach, every one of them, men, children, and old men, greeting us. Some of them were there, old German gentlemen with First War shotguns, falling guns, bird guns, wearing green hunting hats and leather gaiters, very military, and told us we are at your command. And then we started a 6-week action where nightly, every night, we went out in company strengths to harass Arab villages, just to keep their heads down. And I had a company of girls, composed entirely of girls, led by a girl sergeant. Very effective, very thorough. And we kept this up every night of the day, every night of the week. Finally, one day we got a word that Kauji himself was leading a small convoy to capture the Baha'i tomb because he was told that there are solid gold candelabras there weighing 6 to 7 kilos each. Well, there were candelabras. They were 6-7 kilos each, but they were lead painted gold. He didn't know that. He came, we knew that he was coming because one of the British sergeants was our spy in Lebanon. So we planned a little reception for him. We had a very capable demolition guy who was in the British Royal Engineers. And he set a trap for Kauji with a mine on the road where we had to pass. And at dawn, he appeared. The only thing we didn't know that he switched cars. Instead of being in the private car in the middle with 2 armed trucks before and after him, he had a little car at the end of the convoy. So the first truck went over the mine, didn't explode. The second car was the one that was supposed to be, that exploded. We peppered both trucks and took care of all of them, but the little car turned around and fled back to Egypt, to Lebanon. So we missed Kauji, and he survived to the end of the war, and eventually nobody knew what happened to him. He was very lucky that day. And I've got that time, of course, later on I got very friendly again with the Baha'is, and I was given a free use of the facilities in Akko. And I used to come very often to sit in the old house's veranda and read some of their publication in 6-7 languages.
What was your brother doing at this time?
Well, my brother was, first and foremost, the fuel clerk of Socony Vacuum, which was an occupation which was regarded as worthy for the war effort, and he didn't have to join up. But later he did join up, and he got into the Air Force. And as a civilian, before the Air Force was founded, he was traffic controller at the Haifa airport. And he later joined the Air Force and was controller in the Haifa Tower for the duration. Later he was appointed the sort of in charge of aviation fuel in the country, which was very, very scarce, and to have expert handling. That was my brother's due in the War of Independence.
So after 6 weeks in Nahariya, where did you move to then? After 6 weeks in Nahariya, where did you go next?
We got back to Haifa, continued more fighting, and then came out the very fateful day in April, where the Haganah was planning a total action for the capture of Haifa. The main effort, which was later described by Yossi Harel, the present rector of the Haifa University, as the most important battle of the War of Independence, which was, it's blinking, which was the capture of the Arab stronghold in Haifa, the storming of the Arab stronghold in Haifa, and the breaking of the Arab resistance in Haifa, and thus breaking the Arab resistance in Israel. That was the battle for Bet Najada. And it was a extremely daring and most dangerous action I can ever imagine. It cost us a lot of blood, some of my own, a lot of casualties. It consisted of storming a building, a 3-story stone building in the midst of the Arab-held portion of Haifa, boarding the Rushmia Bridge. The higher part of Haifa, the Hadara Carmel, was in Jewish hands. And overlooking all of this was Beit HaTatzia, or the industrial building or complex overlooking the Arab area, where the Haganah High Command was situated. They asked for the A company of the 22nd Brigade to undertake this action. It was composed of getting 2 companies of fighters via 2 sort of jerry-made armored cars. We didn't have armored cars at that time. The armored cars were a sort of an ingenious Jewish invention. They were trucks fitted with steel plates, 2 steel plates, with a distance of 5 inches between them. Those 5 inches were filled with rubble, with stone rubble. Of course, this was good enough for a rifle, but not good enough for a machine gun bullet, which we found out later on.
3, לדבורה? לכיוון דבורה אתה מסתכל? אפשר.
So the action to the capture of Bet Najada was planned by the Haganah a couple of days before that. It was decided the only way to break the Arab resistance is capture their headquarters. Now, the industrial building of Haifa overlooks the Rushmia Valley and the bridge. And it sort of connected both sides of the town. Now, the lower end of the bridge was the Beit Najada, which was the headquarters of the Arab resistance. This 3-story stone building was faced with a 12-foot high concrete wall where the slit opening, the opening from the road to the building, was as narrow as one can go sideways and not high enough without ducking. This was made on the purpose. This concrete wall was cast by the Arabs to prevent us storming the building. Now,
sorry. Okay, sorry.
Now we had these 2 so-called armored cars, which I described before. We had a back opening. In other words, these trucks were going down from the industrial building towards the lower Haifa, and stop in front of these buildings, disgorge the fighters, who then were going to assault the building, go through the slit, and storm the building and dispose or eliminate all the Arab fighters. This was the plan. The execution was something else. We started down. I was heading one company. The action was commanded by a lieutenant at that time, whose name was Tzachi Soroka. Today, Professor Yitzhak Soroka of the Haifa Technical. His father was a famous surgeon, Dr. Soroka. When we started over the bridge, these armored cars got peppered by machine gun fire, and lo and behold, the bullets penetrated. We lost some of the guys in the armored cars, and by mistake, the driver stopped at the lower house. When we got out, we found out that it was the wrong house. So we had to dash up the street at run, under fire, drive through the slit, at which time, in an instant, I remembered that I was holding a Czech rifle instead of a submachine gun like the Thompson, which would have been perfect for this kind of house-to-end fighting action. We rushed into the building, killed several Arabs on the way. I ran 3 upstairs to the 3rd floor, heading my company, who came behind me. And when I was on the 3rd floor, I stopped. In front of me, about 10 yards away, was an Arab sitting on an open window with my face to me, holding a Mills grenade in his right hand. In his left hand had a Sten gun. The Mills grenade was armed. The pin was out. All this happened in a split second. I had my rifle at a shooting angle, and I shot him. And I shot him at the same time. He released the grenade, and the grenade ran on the floor towards me. This all happened within split seconds. As the grenade was rolling, I dived to my right. I dived right into an Arab toilet, which was next to the corridor. And then the Mills grenade went off. I got badly wounded all over my body, mostly below belt. And of course, the Arab fell out of the window 3 floors down. Then we all decided that the house was cleared, but we couldn't get out because the Arabs had 2 machine guns pointed at the door on both sides of the entrance. Well away, so we couldn't reach them, and anybody tried to get out, and we tried. We were instantly killed. We were penned down in this building for 48 hours. No food, no water, practically no ammunition. All this time, the Arabs kept throwing grenades at us. At the end of the day, the British took a hand and lobbed, we don't know whether it was mortars or howitzers down from Haifa Harbor, giving a hand, helping the Arabs, which landed on the roof of this building. Now, of course, the lower floor was full of casualties, dead friends, and wounded ones. Very few, I think only 3 were left on their feet. And then the Haganah decided to take a pincer action, which took time to effectuate. And it took a whole night, the next day, to get organized, at which time they brought the resistance from both sides and again came to our rescue. Of course, during the night, many attempts were made at a very high cost in dead and wounded to supply us with food and water, which didn't succeed, and ammunition. At the third day, we were dragged out and carried to hospital. Again, to my old hunting grounds, the Borchov Hospital, at which time, of course, the nurses had minor business because this was pieces, very big pieces of a Mills grenade, fished out from various parts of my body. I still have 8. One of them can be seen quite clearly right here. This is very visible, and I don't remove it because it reminds me how I'm still here, not there. And I stayed at the hospital for about 3 weeks. And then Moshe Carmel, who was a wonderful man, the brigade commander, the brigade was named after him, Carmeli, came along to the hospital with his wounded, and he came to me and he said, well, Zvika, your fighting days are over. I got a nice table prepared for you. And as soon as you get out of the hospital in recuperation, you can man that table. So right away I said, Moshe, you know me, I'm not fit for tables. So he said, what would you like to do? I said, I heard there's a navy being formed, an Israeli navy. I'm talking now in terms of May 48. Says, yes. Says, why don't you give me a transfer? So on the spot, he wrote out what was called in that time a zettel, a chit, bit of paper. Zvi Friar is transferred, signed Moshe Carmel. So sometimes in June, I got out and went down to Haifa Harbor to number 15 shed, where the Israel Navy was situated. And I got to this young chap who was a recruiting officer. And he started interviewing me. He says, I told him I was in the Royal Navy. What were you doing in the Royal Navy? I said, well, I spent most of the time in Fleet Air Arm. He says, what did the Fleet Air Arm do? He says, well, they run carriers, you know, ships where airplanes land. He says, we don't have any. We don't need you. He was wrong. We did have one single aircraft carrier at that time, in 1948. Luckily, it was sold again before it could sink the treasury of the founded state of Israel. But that's another story. If it's worthwhile telling, I'll tell you. But that comes into the portion of Tel Aviv. So with that great news from this young whippersnip, I got back to headquarters, went to Moshe Carmel, and I said, Moshe, do me a favor, strike out the word Yam and write Avir, which he did. And happily I found myself at the well-known Haifa airport, where I was greeted with my brother still being air controller, with my cousin Moshe Fryer, also air controller, and other friends from the Navy. And I was, first job I got there via Air Force headquarters is take over Bachstein, today's Israel Air Force Center for Technical Education. Actually, it's like a university today, because all technical people in the Air Force got trained there. That was my first stint in the Israeli Air Force.
Okay. 3, Devorah. Okay.
So when I wrote out the report to headquarters of the what we have at this technical center, apparently the head of the training command found favor with this. His name was Colonel James Sperling, American, not Jewish. And he asked me to come to headquarters, where I became his operations officer. Of course, at that time, there were no ranks, so-called ranks, visible ranks. There were just soldiers, sergeants, and officers. And I was given various tasks, most of them quite interesting. One of them was worthwhile mentioning, was the establishment of the first psychotechnical division of the Israeli Air Force. And he gave me a car, a driver, and an address at Mayam Baruch, Kibbutz Mayam Baruch, up in the Upper Galilee, where this pair, the Rosenfelds, were situated, Masha and Miki, her husband, both South Africans, both experts in psychotechnical testing for air crew. Another fellow called Abe, also South Africans, and I was sent there to collect them. So I got this car, we drove up, the fighting was still going on in Israel. I'm talking in terms now of July 48. So we got to Mayam Baruch at night, something like 11 o'clock. And suddenly, as we approached the gates of of course the gates were closed and chained, a spotlight turned on, full face, and the sound started, stop. Who goes there? In English. Of course, most of the Chaverim at Mayam Baruch were Anglo-Saxons. So I said, Tel Aviv, Israel, says, we don't believe you.
Yeah.
So get out of the car, one with hands up and approach. So I got out and with this letter. Anyway, we got in, and the next morning they did an assembly of the kibbutz member, Asefa Klalit it's called. As people who don't know, kibbutz is run totally democratic. Anything can be put to a vote. Majority carries the day on any subject. So to relinquish 3 members of the kibbutz was a very major event. And the Asifah Klalit was called, and they had to, the argument went back and forth for 2 solid hours, whether to agree or whether not to agree. So then I told them how important it is, how it would save lives to choose the proper people, so forth and so on. And I told them that I was educated in the kibbutz, so I know what it's all about. They agreed. So next morning we took off and went down back to Tel Aviv, and they established their the psychotechnical division. And next I got the next job from Colonel Sperling. And I have that in writing. It's a very unusual piece of document because it's in English. At that time, all the Air Force was run in English. And Colonel Sperling gave me the job of finding an airfield, an unused airfield, where a flying school could be established. Because at this time, most of the Israeli pilots were being trained abroad. Some in Ciampino in Italy, some in Zatex in Czechoslovakia, some in the United States, and some in South Africa.
Do you have any idea how many planes and pilots Israel had at the time?
Well, let's put it this way. This was at the time when Israel had about 11 or 12 Piper Cubs, 90 horsepower, had 1 2-engine Rapid, had a couple of Dakotas. At that time, they had no fighters, real fighting aircraft. That came later. That came later through the efforts of the Machalikim, who actually really made the Israeli Air Force. Without them, the Israeli Air Force would have never come into being. But of course, the main contribution to this was by a chap called Al Schwimmer, who founded the Israeli Air Force, was a neighbor of mine in Savion, and that sometimes we were friends, who managed to steal, smuggle, you name it, B-17s in which I later flew. But most important, far most important, he managed to get transport aircraft called commandos. If one would put the finger of what really made this country, I would, without hesitation, put my finger on commandos. That aircraft was the only aircraft capable of housing a dismantled Messerschmitt aircraft in its fuselage, complete, another aircraft having the wings, landing in Israel, assembling that aircraft, surprising the hell out of the Egyptians, downing several of the aircraft, stopping that column, the armored column, 50 miles from Tel Aviv. And, well, it was the aircraft, that Messerschmitt, which wasn't really a Messerschmitt. It was an Avia 199 made in Czechoslovakia. But for intents and purposes, it was a Czech-made Messerschmitt. And then the arms, some of the arms which I used in the storming of the Najada stronghold in Haifa were Czech rifles smuggled in by these commando aircraft, landing in landing strips in the Negev.
Do you remember when you started to fly?
When I started to fly? Yes. No, not with the British. With us, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I started to fly. That's the next part of the story, which I will, your permission, start now. Anyway, I choose an airfield called Saint Jean next to Akko. Why? Because the parameters laid down by Colonel Sperling were very strict. It had to be out of artillery range of the Dan Arabs. Now try to remember, it was 48, August, the 1st of August, I got the date. The Arabs were shelling everything next to the border. So everything was under fire. Airfields like En Shemer would have been ideal firing range. Every other airfield, vacant airfield, was a firing range. The only one I could find was Saint Jean next to Akko. So I recommended that. It had one problem. The base building were occupied by the 7th Brigade, 7th Armored Brigade. Now, the 2nd Armored Brigade was led by a Canadian officer, a major, name of Dunkelman. And I was told later there was the toughest officer, Machalik, ever to serve in Israel. Here is what happened. I had an order from the Ramatkal to Dunkelman to turn over the base to me so we can bring down all the necessary things to turn the airbase into a flying school. So I drove down in a car with a driver. Of course, I was in uniform with no ranks. But I went and I had all the right things. I went and knocked on the door and approached the door to this office. And then I saw something which I didn't believe my eyes. I again would like to remind you, August 48. The whole Machane, the whole camp was lined up with whitewashed stones. Everything was spit and polished. There were guards on the gate with white gaiters and white webbing. 2 guards stood at the side of the door to the major's office, wood bayonets attached. I never seen anything like that since the parades and the victory parades in the Royal Air Force. So I knocked on the door, and he just said, "Come." That's the only word he said. I stepped in. This guy was sitting behind a desk writing. Didn't look up. I stood there. He said, still didn't look up. I said, "Yes." So I put in front of his face the order for requesting his turnover the base to the Israeli Air Force. He didn't say a word. He just shouted, "Guards." The door crashed open. The two guards stepped in with their bayonets at attention, and Dunkelman says, take this man to the gate, in English, throw him out, and if he comes back, shoot him. So I went to the gate, I went back to Tel Aviv. I was later told that Ben Gurion personally had to phone Dunkelman to relinquish the camp. He did. When we got there, they were dismantling the tins from the roof. They took away the toilet seats, and they were removing the wings from the windows. And we had to stop them. It cost me a fortune to return the place to a living quarters. And of course, most of it useless to him, he's out of spite. Anyway, this camp came into being. The flying school, I was appointed cadet officer to the first bunch of cadets. Of course, I had a hand in that prior to that. While I was at headquarters, I had several jobs because no job was a sort of a full-time job. One of the jobs was I was appointed by Sperling as recruiting officer for air crew. So I told, but Colonel, look, I have no experience in this. I said, yes, but you're in a fleet Aram, you know what aircraft look like. I said, would you rely on me looking at the guy and saying that he's fit for aircrew? He says, yes, till better time turns over. That was prior to the Rosenberg's establishing the psychiatric department. So I checked out guys like Uri Yoffe, Avram Yoffe, and a few other very famous pilots later on. So these guys were that and Sanjin under my command. Those guys I recruited months before that. So we started off, and it was a very strict, that's why they appointed me. They had to have iron discipline. They were a very unruly mob. They were most of them sabras, no discipline. Everything was arguable. And I had to throw them into line. I had one guy who was outstanding. I could never wake him up. I couldn't find the spot on his clothes, on his shoes, on anything. His name was Benjamin Pellet. Benny Pellet. Later, commanding Israel Air Force. He was my outstanding pupil and my lifelong friend. So one day, change of command. Suddenly, James Sperling disappears. New colonel comes in. Pappy Harold Green, United States Air Force, Jewish this time. He was given command of training command. And one day he comes to me, and this was about November 48, and he says, Zvi, I got a very important job for you. I said, what's more important than leading future pilots of the Air Force? He says, look. Then he told me the sad story of 69 Squadron. Now, I told you the story that Alstrom smuggled the B-17s to Israel and so on and so forth. The composition of the crews of the 69 Squadron at that time was entirely Machal. At a certain time, they led the so-called rebellion, because the Israeli Air Force at that time decided that Machalnikim have to sign Israeli contracts. All this great pay was out. They had to conform to Israeli army standards. Because most of the Machalnikim came for the war only. They had no intention of staying here, no intention of becoming. So they revolted. So the Air Force decided to release them, whoever wanted to leave Israel. Most of them opted. That was a disaster because it left 69 Squadron without a single air gunner. Now, a B-17 has a crew of 11. 6 of them are gunners, or 7 of them. So the orders were no B-7 takes off without gunners. So Pappy Green decided he has to have a crash course in air gunners. And he had some officers who were in the Air Force, were released, went back to South Africa, and had to be recalled. But he had to have an adjutant. And he had to have somebody who spoke both Hebrew and English proficiently. And he elected me, and he asked me. At this time, I was slated to go to pilot's course number 2, the one I was leading. So after the first one, I was going to go on a course as a trainee myself. So I told Pepe, but you know, it's our agreement. So I said, I'll give you my word. You finish that gunner's course. I said, how long is it going to take? He says, no more than 4 months. And I'll have you back in the time for this. So of course I have a problem in my life. And it paid me off the wrong way several times in my career. I'm a good soldier. I see the importance of a mission. Never the rank, never the payoff, and that cost me. So I agreed. So I went down to Ramat David and knocked this thing into shape and got everything organized. I have pictures you would never believe in Quinson huts with no heating, no aeration, in the heights of summer, like 40 degrees, baking, and still going this course, which made history. It was the first aircrew course in the annals of Israel Air Force. It was the first wing parade, which you can see over there, me taking the salute and being handed the wings by Aaron Remes. And I was the first Israeli to receive wings at the wing parade. The other guys were South Africans, but not Israelis. And that's how I started my career in the Air Force, because of course at the end of the course we were all transferred to 69 Squadron. That was the purpose. When I asked Pappy Green, how about returning to flying school and finish the stint and getting the flying course, he said, I'm sorry, but I've been relieved. He was relieved for no reason anybody can know, and it was a disaster to the training command, which lasted several years. It's one of the worst periods of the Air Force. They took a trained man, they sacked him for no reason, and didn't have a replacement. So I got stuck in 69 Squadron, and I asked for an interview with Aaron Remes, and he told me, look, we are needed. This is most important. It's the only heavy bombardment squadron in the Israel Air Force. It can't fly without gunners. Says, yes, but why don't you run another gunner's course and let me get where I belong? Says, look, if you stay in, I plan to send one guy to England, and he's going to be qualified as an officer, and he's going to be chief gunner of the Air Force. I says, yes, when? He says, I don't know, in a year or two. I said, Aaron, I'm not going to say it. So then he asked me to present myself and tried to persuade me to sign the contract, which was at that time Tzava Keva. I didn't, and I got released from the Air Force in late 50. And my place was taken by my very close friend Amos Yarden, who later went to England, went to professional gunner's course in England at Camberwell, and was made officer and was a major in the Israel Air Force. But my heart stayed with the 69 Squadron. And of course I went out to private life, looking around to find what to do. So then I decided to open my shop again in Haifa, which I did, but my heart wasn't really in it. So I decided in 52 rather, to finish my studies, and the best way to do that in wood engineering which carries a degree, and the place I chose was Finland and Sweden. And then I got myself arranged through a friend of mine in Haifa who was later the Finnish consul. And I went to study in Finland and later Sweden. And I studied with some of the top architects like Arvi Aalto and Tapio Vaara, and especially specializing in flexwood, which is a very specialized field in the wood utilization. And of course, I had girlfriends because I was the first Israeli in Finland. I was a very unusual specimen. And girls were just dying for strangers of any kind. And then I got part of my study were in Sweden. Then I met a girl called Gunnel Olsen. Her father was Fred Olsen, the biggest private ship owner in the world, Olsen Lines. And she was the only daughter, and we were engaged. So at a certain time, my mother found out about this, and she didn't see how she could get along with the Swedish heiress as a daughter-in-law. So she feigned a heart attack, and I came to Haifa to see my sick mother. Then she miraculously recovered. Then she sort of introduced me to that coming wife of mine. And that sort of put to my plans in Scandinavia. I didn't manage to get my degree. I was sort of married to a local girl, name of Miriam. And that means starting a family. That means settling down. That means finding a job. So I went to a company called Mephi, which was a South African company manufacturing beds, mattresses, and so on. And they had a furniture division and a plant in Netanya. And they were asking for a manager. So I presented my credentials. They were very imposing. And they said, "You are just the right man for us." And I said, yeah, but they said they wanted what's my position? They said that they want a designer, a setter-up, and a manager. Now, a setter-up is a man who sets up woodworking, automatic woodwork machinery, which is a very special job, of which I was trained, but a very special job in itself. And a designer is a job in itself, and a manager's job. They were very clever South African Jews. They all wanted the three jobs run into one on one salary. I said, "Oh, thank you." And I didn't accept it. I was later employed by a South African company, H.H. Fraser, as a efficiency engineer, which was part of my training in Scandinavia. And it was the first company in Israel. And I worked for them for 6 months. It was a fantastic thing. But then the South Africans decided that Israeli can't keep their words about payment. So they went back to South Africa. And at this time I decided I'm going to go into my business on my own. Of course, this one I was married. I already had a son called Alon. My wife was working as a secretary at a lawyer's office. And we were living in a 1.5 room apartment in Haifa. And financially, I didn't see I was working most of the time in Tel Aviv. So I was actually leading two lives. So at that time I decided that Haifa hasn't got the financial future I'm looking for. So I consulted with my previous wife and decided to move to Tel Aviv. Well, then I went and established, which was something which was actually, I would call it a line in my life. I always did something or tried to do something nobody else did. And most of them were successful. And being first in the line, you always scoop up the cream. All latecomers got the dregs. So I went and established a enameling shop. Why enameling shop? Which is metal. Part of the training in the plants that I worked on in Scandinavia, you see, when you train in this kind of business in Scandinavia, you do both work, you work at certain plants to acquire experience, and you have schoolroom training. So during these practical training in factories, some of these furniture had metal parts. These metal parts had to be enameled. I myself designed the winning piece of furniture, which was a bookshelf, which two sides were of metal grids from metal wires, and they had to be enameled. So I had to learn about enameling. And all finishing in the wood trade in Scandinavia was by mechanical means. This hand polishing was something that the Scandinavians forgot ages ago. So I learned mechanical polishing, what's called, or spray varnishing. So that didn't exist in Israel. So I opened a plant which was at that time enormous in Tel Aviv, and I called it MIT, M-A-T, Mechon Ashpara Ta'asiyatit. And it was an instant success. It was enormous, and 800 square meters at that time was considered beyond. But somehow I foresaw that it's going to sort of come up. And it did. And essentially I dropped the wood finishing business because it didn't pay. The enameling business paid very, very well. Eventually the plant worked 3 shifts round the clock. And it went off for 10 years.
You had more children along the way.
I had a partner who owned the building where it was situated. And at that time, of course, we were living in 2 rooms in Ramat Gan. And I had a second child coming. So I discussed with my wife that, listen, we have to have more room. And we went shopping for a bigger apartment, 2.5 rooms, and they asked for half the world. We just couldn't meet it. Then somebody told me, you know, there's this new settlement called Savion. I says, where is Savion? He says, look, you have a car. Get in the car, start driving towards Lida Airport. And on the way, after Tel Shomer, you're going to see a sign on your left-hand side, Chkerna Yesod sign, Savion, that's where it is. So I took the wife, 8 months pregnant, got in the car, drove down to this place, and as farther we got away from Tel Aviv, the lower her visage become. And then we turned off and was driving at that time, mind you, I'm talking about 1956. I was driving through Pardesim. Only thing was a petrol station, a tiny petrol station at a crossroads. And we were driving, and suddenly it's pointed to the right. And suddenly we saw one building and then nothing more, Pardesim, another building. And finally we got to where this guy was going to meet us, the salesman, for the Africa-Israel company, which was at that time the real company, still run by South Africans. And there were at that time 6 houses in Savion. So we drove to Savion, finally met the guy, and he presented us with a building which were on the ground floor.
אתה מסתכל על דבורה?
So this guy presents us with with a half-finished building, and he said he names the price was practically ridiculous. The finished home should have cost something like, with the ground, with all 14,000 pounds at that time. I'm talking in terms of 1956, no, 57. And a flat in Tel Aviv would have cost considerably more. So of course I had the feeling that this is a good deal. And I was starting negotiating with him. Then my previous wife, Miriam, started asking questions like, where's the grocery? Let's have families. The man said, there's no grocery. There's a little guy from next village, comes along in a tricycle, takes you out in the morning, brings back in the afternoon. Her face fell. Then he asked her, where's the hairdresser? She says, no hairdresser. Next hairdresser's in Tel Aviv. Then she asked him, where's the post office? He says, no post office. There's this place with the boxes and you get your mail in the boxes. Then she threw the clincher. She said to him, how about buses? He says, there's no buses. There's a company, Chevrat Africa company bus, which travels to Tel Aviv twice a day. At this stage, she said, we go home. I'm not going to live here. I said, but I want to buy the house. She says, if you buy the house, I go to the rabbinate, get a divorce. I said, you're going to get a divorce with this? She says, yes. So we went home, we fought all weekend. This was a Friday, and of course I won the game. We lived in Savion for 30 years. We had another child. We had Alon was born, my first son was born in Haifa. Dalia, the artist, was born in Savion. She was the first girl to be born in Savion. Then I had my little daughter Karina, also born in Savion. Then I built another house in Savion. Because the first one is somebody from South Africa dying to buy it, so I sold it to her. And then we lived until 82, when we sort of fell out of sorts and we got divorced. And then I went to live in Tel Aviv, and my ex-wife went to live in Kiryat Ono. This time I had established, I have gotten tired of this business. It was going well, but it was not exciting enough. So I sold it and was going to take up a job abroad, running a couple of factories for a European conglomerate. But we thought it was still before the divorce, we disagreed on that, so I didn't take up the job. So I established another company, Chemadir, which I stayed for many years. And in the meantime, of course, the children grew up. And my elder daughter, Daria, got married. And she has 3 children, Natalie, and Adam, and Liri. And then my second daughter got married, Karina, with a wonderful guy, and she has 2 wonderful children, Jonathan, and a little daughter who was wonderful. We call her Chapachula, but her name is Imbar. She is in the business, as I told you, my eldest daughter is a teacher of arts, and she now is retired, but she does freelancing. And my little daughter is in the business of international business development. That brings us up to, okay, I was divorced, and I went to live, it was difficult to leave Savion, because once you got used to live in a house with a garden and so on, so I had a difficult time finding the right spot. And I found a flat in University Street 2. not too far away, Ramat Aviv Gimel, the famous one. And I had a long series of girlfriends. And actually, if not my last girlfriend, I would have never met Judy. And it's an extraordinary story. Really worthwhile telling.
We want to hear it.
Her name was Jeanette. I was 60. She was 23. She was Tunisian origin. She had 3 kinds of different blonde hair, all genuine. Gray-green eyes, and a figure to match. She was a traffic stopper. And to boot, she was absolutely madly in love with me. She lived most of the time in a big flat, 4-room flat. And of course, I was running my business, and I was a man of town, and I had this mistress living with me, and more ex-girlfriend knocking on the door. And then you see, I represented American companies. I had to be twice a year in the United States. So our next trip was approaching, and I told Jeanette, listen, I have to go away for months. She says, no, please, I can't live without, please take me with you. I said, Jeanette, I can't, you don't speak English. And they don't speak, the only languages she spoke was Arabic, French, and Hebrew. I said, those languages are not spoken in the States. You have to know English. I will do anything in the world. Anyway, she kept at me for weeks on end. And then I relented. I said, okay, you find me a school that will teach you English within 3 months, and I'll take you. So she went to the Yellow Pages. And the first thing she came across was a place called Speaking. That just sounded very good to me. Says, okay, let's go there. So we made an appointment. We got there. They were situated in Bet Zioni America in Tel Aviv. So we got there, and the janitor says, Speaking is downstairs in the basement. Went down there, and we saw the secretary. And she said, yes, but we don't accept pupils just like that. They have to pass a test with a testing teacher. And her name is Miss Judy, but now she's busy. You'll have to wait. I said, okay, we'll wait. A quarter an hour later, some girl comes out from a room, and she says, now she's free, please go and see her. So we walk in, open the door, and that's Judy. She had a pair of green pants on like now, a white shirt, and I was stuck. The moment I lay down there, now we started the whole game. First of all, she said, okay, you just wait in the waiting room. I have to talk to this girl alone. She talked to her, then she called me in alone. She said, listen, I can't do anything with this girl. She knows nothing. It's absolutely zero. She hasn't got the 5 words in English. I had to start from scratch, and I haven't got the time for it. I said, money is no object, and I started hacking her Chainik. And then I asked her, okay, she said, I can't consider it, I'm just divorced and I have many problems and this. So I asked, please, no way. So I said, okay, can I have your phone number? No way, she said. Then I said to her, okay, please have my phone number. I gave her my card. And then I started getting rid of this girl. And that was a major understanding. She didn't have any part of it. She stole tantrums, she knocked on the doors. Anyway, and I waited. I waited on pins and needles. And days went past, and I told my secretaries at the office, and everybody in the office, a lady called Judy, drop everything, get me out of no matter what meeting, get me on the phone. 2 weeks, it took her 2 weeks to relent. Then she phoned me. So, because she was bona fide, she badly needed money. So she says, okay, I consent to meet you. And okay, said, let's have dinner. She said, no. Okay, let's have coffee. Okay. I picked her up, and I had the red rose on the dashboard of my car. I'm saying, welcome, Judy. And from that moment on, I started cooking her. And the result is here.
How many years later?
20. And there's not enough years in my lifetime to make me happier than I am now. When she's away, the light goes on. It comes on again when she comes home, like just now.
Did? Okay. Thank you very much. We're going to follow you into your study.
Yeah, we finished everything. Yes.
Go ahead. How did you get your name?
When I told you that I'd established a unit called the Veterans of 69 Squadron, this was a major undertaking which had a really fabulous history. During one of these items, I had a request from Aviv Ben Nun, who was then squadron leader, to get hold of some overalls for the squadron which had no buttons, no zippers, nothing that could drop into an engine. He was trained in the States and he saw such overalls. So I looked around at who was the leader, the manager of Teta before that Ata, Amos Ben Gurion. So I phoned him and I told him the story. He says, come along. I met him and we clicked. Right away we became friends. And he was very much taken with this effort of mine establishing this. And he right away phoned Teta, the division of Ata where the piece work was made up. The sewing shop, a very big one, 500 workers in Arab parts of Israel and so on. And he gave orders to make 500 overalls. It made a sensation in Tel Aviv, believe me. And then we became friends. And one day he sent me an invitation. The old man was having, and he knew that I admired Ben Gurion endlessly, because I thought, and I still think, he was the greatest man of our generation, and without him there would have never been a country. And he asked me to come to be his guest at his 80th birthday in Sde Boker. So I told Amos, listen, what do I bring an old man? He doesn't smoke. He doesn't eat chocolates. Flowers, what do I bring him? He says, listen, he's got a photographic memory. He never forgets anything. He says, you got a picture of him that he doesn't have, and he knows that. And he was asking around for anybody who has a picture. It's a very memorable picture, and a historical one, and I took it. It goes back to 1948, when we had the first Sahal parade, which was a disaster. It broke up. Ever heard of the story? Tzahal made a parade without proper military police, without police, and it started marching along Allenby Street, going on to Ben Yehuda, to the stadium at the Tel Aviv port. On the way, people started grabbing the soldiers, embracing them, trusting flowers. The parade never arrived. It broke up in the middle. It was an enormous scandal. The whole government with Ben Gurion was sitting on the stands at the stadium, and the old stadium at the Migrash Taruchot, and I was waiting for the parade. No parade. And of course there was a spotter plane, and it radioed down the parade, and he was livid. The old man was absolutely fit to be tied. And one guy said, look, we had to save the situation. I had a bunch of Machalikim pilots with me. So he told me, Kalman Korin said, bring him down and let's have the old man and present these guys to him. So I brought him below the stadium. We got the old man down. We popped him in the middle. And I stood there on the side. I gave somebody my camera. He made the shot with all of them in it. Some of them were real, very famous fighter pilots in the Second World War. And the old man knew that this picture existed. It wasn't in his album. So Amos told me, you get enlarge that picture, frame it nice and present to him. So that's what I did. So when I presented to him, my son was next to me. And he said to me, what's your name? Freyer. Friar. No. He says, you can't. What's your son doing? He's going to join the Air Force with a name like, no. And it's all the pictures. He says, no, you can't have that. So my son said to him, Ben Gurion, as Mata Omer, what do you say? So, you know, everybody knows his penchant for Hebraizing foreign names. So he said, Friar. Friar is Dror. And you are his father, Avidror. And then he started waving his fingers. No, Avidror, no, Avidror. And he says, V'lo latet et ze lechaluka. He meant to say not Avidror. What he really meant, that at that time there was this very big fight between Mapai and Mapam, the division. So, Lo latet et ze lechaluka. He meant something else, but that's what he said. And he was waving pictures. It's all that picture is taken. And it's hanging on my wall. That's how I got to be Avidror. Of course, next day we went to the register and changed our name, and so did my brother. And now you'll find in the phone book only 4 Avidrors, and we're all family.
Amazing. It's an amazing story. All right, thank you very much.
And you can see the picture.
We're going to go see the picture.
The picture that I presented to him, I mean.
You have both. You have it.
Of course, I got the duplicates.
Amazing. Okay.
Right. You wanted to hear one more thing.
I do.
And we finish with that. I have to tell it because this is a real telling story. I told you that my family went to Brazil. They became already very wealthy. And my aunt invited my father and mother for a visit to Brazil in 1954. And they sent them tickets, boat tickets on a very famous cruise ship.
Which one?
The one that got attacked by terrorists. Achille Lauro. But at that time, the rule of the land is you had to have an exit permit. It was an unknown thing today. You had to have it signed by the Sochnut, by the Ministry of Finance, and by the police. So of course my father went to police, signed, Minister of Finance signed. He went to the Sochnut. He says, no, we won't sign it. You got 4 beds from us. Please return the 4 Sochnut beds and we'll sign. Because the rule at that time at Bat Galim was, when they chased you out, they gave you 4 beds. I mean, a bed to each person. So my father said to him, yes, beds? Okay, I'll show you beds. He went home because he's such an expert businessman. He had everything filed. He had filed for the beds that my mother brought back in 1939. So he brought the receipt. He says, this is the beds that you mean? Oh, I'm sorry, we made them. He stamped it. Then when my father came back, he went to the government and he asked to be refunded of 1,500 sterling. It was an enormous sum then computed, with interest. They started sending him to Pontius Pilatus. At the end of the day, they told them, listen, we didn't arrange the Aliyah. The revisionists did. Go and see them. Of course, my father didn't live to see the day I think he did, when Begin won the elections. But that time he didn't have the koach anymore to fight them. I would have. So the 1,500 sterling remained unpaid. We paid for that aliyah. The 306 people who live here live by din that my father provided the money and the leadership. Oh. And now it's commemorated in my writing at the second Aliyah Museum at Atlit. And you can see it. It's on Falder, it's on the blog and everywhere.
So you have stuff in the museum in Atlit. You mentioned Beit HaTfutzot. Also you have stuff, and in the Royal Air Force
We got a very interesting story about Atlit. You will never believe it. Look, you better stay for breakfast.
But this is
wait a minute, this is the end. This is the end. I mean, it's worthwhile telling because you can see it. I had planned a visit to Atlit, and they told me you have to pay. So I told this lady, look, you know something, we slaved here for months to establish the camp. She says, how come? So I told her, listen, When the British started to build the camp, which was in the first day of 1940, they told us that the Yishuv a story, a lie. They said that the camp was going to be built for German prisoners of war. No way. They were building it for illegal aliyah. So of course Solel Bonet got the contract, and Solel Bonet was looking around for somebody to run the mitbach. There was 140 workers that had to be fed. My father took it up. My mother, who had cooks, servants, started to cook for 140 people, and my father was helping, and I was the errand boy, fetching vegetables and what have you. And while I went to school, of course, I wasn't around all the time. So they went to the end of building the camp, and it was never mentioned anywhere. They were so interested in it that they asked me to write a full article about it, which I did with pictures. And now they publish it in their, they got a sort of loop going around that visitors can see it. And they also wrote me that whenever you come with your family, entrance is free. End of story.
תודה.
Okay, we can start.
Okay, that's me and my ex-wife Miriam.
רגע, אז בואי תעבדי פה שהוא ידבר אלייך.
תגיד מתי אתה
אוקיי, אני רץ.
Go ahead.
That's me and my wife, ex-wife Miriam, on her 60th birthday. That's a group in Napoli, coming back from Brazil. That's me, my daughters Dalia and Karina. That's Dalia with her grandchildren, with my grandchildren, Natalie, Adam, and Liri. That's a group in the last course of Makamim. That's company leaders in the Haganah. It's 1947 in Kibbutz Alonim.
Where are you in that picture?
I'm here in this funny hat, but that was the rule of the day. This is a Seafire 9, Mark 9 at the Fleet Air Arm.
תראה לי עוד פעם בצילום איפה אתה, בתמונה הקבוצתית.
This is me here at Kibbutz Alonim, 1947.
אוקיי, ומתחת אז.
This was in December 1947. It's the last course of the Haganah, because after that it was a Tzahal. Aircrew identification card, the first
רגע,
one.
איך אתה מטוס למטה?
This one.
This is this Mark Seafire Mark 9 Fleet Air Arm at HMS Grebe next to Alexander. It's me in the cockpit. That's me in 1943 when I got petty officer, and that's my cousin Marcel Fryer in Benghazi 1943, just before I was arrested at the revolt of the 2nd Brigade, the Jewish Brigade. That's a family picture comprising my parents, brother David, my wife Miriam, Alon, my son. This is Ella, my daughter, my sister-in-law, and her 2 kids. That's my father and mother, 1952. This is in Sofia, 1937, at the finals of the Sofia, 1937, the finals of the ice skating championship for youth. I was then 12. 12? Yeah. This. No, I was 13.
על איזה תמונה אתה עכשיו?
אמצע.
אוקיי.
This is me in 1938 at my bar mitzvah in Sofia. And this is actually a memorable picture. This is my identity card picture, Palestine government taken in Yagur 1939. This is the way I looked after 6 months. That's me and my mother in Arad in 1936.
Again?
That's me and my mother in 1936 in Arad. That's me in aircrew gear, picture taken for passport to fly with El Al, while still in Air Force uniform. This is me in Benghazi with that French salvage diver who helped us snag some Tommy guns and whiskey, of course. This was after the action against Kauji, which he escaped from at the Baha'i shrine in Sanjin, March 48. This is Aluf Aron Remez handing him my wings, the first Israeli to see wings at a real Air Force parade. This is Aluf General Moshe Carmel, the dedication of the 22nd Battalion's bridge in Haifa, where we took off for Bet HaNajada. We gone? This is the way I was garbed for a reception at Prince Charles on the anniversary of the Fleet Air Arm in London at the St. James Palace. Those two pictures were taken on my wife Judy's 60th birthday in a cafe and that's my daughter Dalia and the family. And that is my other son-in-law, Ron, and her family, with her children.
Okay. All right, let's go to the other room. Is that
Right.
okay?
אתה רוצה שאני אעלה את זה?
כן, מההוצאה.
It's too short.
לא משנה, מפה אפילו, זה
Just
בסדר.
take it, you can just take it down now and start talking about it.
אתה יכול לקחת את זה למטה.
טוב,
פשוט להוריד את זה.
יותר קל. אז יש פה כמה דברים.
I'm going to switch you to English.
There's some...
אוקיי.
Okay, so these are Second World War. This is 60 years fighting the Nazis. That's my Air Force wings. This is Palmach. What it makes this very unusual is this. This is given only to disabled war veterans who fought in the War of Independence of Israel. Now, to have that and to have Air Force wings, now that's an anomaly. How comes, people ask me, how come? You were a war veteran, how come you, so I told them, I didn't tell them, simply. This is 22nd Brigade. This is my squadron, 69 Squadron. This is the medal that I'm going to hand out at the reception at the ambassadors. This is very recent, it's only 3 months old. And this, of course, from our side, from Minister Sneh. What makes this also unusual is this, because I'm the only member of the Fleet Air Arm Association from Israel in Britain, the only one alive, or anyone. Those are also significant because those are badges given to me by the French squadrons stationed in Israel during Kadesh, where I was acting as the liaison officer from Ramat David base to the French squadrons, which for many years was a deep secret, but of course not anymore. So we go along now?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, of course, there are many pictures here. This one is, I think, of importance to anybody who's interested. This was my flight in the Phantom, and my pilot, the fellow here on his knees, is Colonel Aviam Sela of Pollard fame. Remember Pollard? Right. And that's also pictures of, and that was the dunking after landing. This was given to my squad by my squadron. Okay, before we get there, this, of course, is the famous picture I described to you with Ben Gurion in the middle. It's me right here, and all the rest of them are famous Machal pilots who conquered Haifa. This was given by people who conquered Akko. This was 8 years of the Haganah. I'm still a member of Haganah. And that was given to my 60th birthday. My children planted their little wood in the hills of Jerusalem. That's the aircraft I flew in the Royal Fleet Air Arm.
Just a second.
And that's the description of the medal. That's the sort of teuda. But I have better ones next door. We will see. Okay. These are various wings which I got during my lifetime. This is a Fleet Air Arm wing as a tag. This was given to those who flew in action in Tashach. This was the French Air Force. And that is the commemorative plaque given by Aluf Chalutz at the ceremony several years ago. We've gone here. This is the wall, camera shy. This is his picture here. And those are pictures with Prince Charles at the reception at St. James Palace 6 years ago. With my wife Judy.
Can you point Charlie, please? No.
This is Prince Charles. This is Mr. White, the chairman of Fleet Air Arm Association. This is myself. It's my wife Judy.
Again.
Prince Charles,
Yeah.
myself, White, the chairman of Fleet Air Arm Association, and my wife Judy. That's the family crest of the Freyer family. To me by
Wait. Again, you're talking to Dvora.
this was given to me by the what they call the major the mayor, the Stuttgart mayor, the Frankfurt mayor, during the time I served as a consul in Frankfurt, 1978-81. Of course, being the mayor of Frankfurt is a very choice position in Germany because it carried a lot of weight with them. Frankfurt was also always a center of gravity. This plaque was given to me by my squadron at 55 years of squadron history. So I served in that squadron 55 years. I'm still serving.
Can you point it again?
This is a design for a placard that I designed, which you'll see later. And that denotes all the airplanes flown by that squadron, starting with B-17s, F-4 Phantoms, and now RAM, the F-15I, which is the big mailed fist of the Israeli Air Force today. This was composed and designed by my elder daughter Daria on my 75th birthday.
And Shlomi, walk it outside if there's things on the walls right now.
Oh yes, we'll see all that. And I worked in 3 years. Because both of them, that's a photographic anomaly. They still haven't discovered how it was done, that the sun is on the floor. And those are pictures with the rhino, which are not easily duplicated, seeing to the fact that that baby belongs to the 3.5-ton mother. And rhinos are very unforgiving when you start toying with the totos. Behind you is the one that we were looking at, Devorah. Those two cartoons have something in common, very interesting, very unusual. This was painted by an Egyptian cartoonist in front of the cathedral in Firenze 10 years before 89. I spoke to him in Arabic, and since then he was my slave. I came 10 years later with my wife. He recognized me, Judy, recognized me miles away, and he was out of his mind, and he was dead set of doing a painting, a sketch of Judy. But she dislikes it intensely, despite the fact that I think it's very good. So we parked it here. This was done by a friend of mine who passed away, the man who designed the Cinema City, Lazar Chizkiah, and it was done in 1948 at St. Jean Flying School. This was done by Ze'ev, the cartoonist. This is my lifelong friend, Baron Edmond de Rothschild. Edmond de Rothschild until he died. And we were in very good friendship because I planned for him the Rothschild Museum in Frankfurt, in Germany. This was the time I was president in Rotary, also that. This is also my friend Karl Otto Pöhl, the president of the Bundesbank the time I was in Germany. And of course he was the most powerful man because the Bundesbank in Germany, which is a central bank, is actually the power of Germany, not the chancellor. That was the Herr Schmidt, the Minister of Finance. That's Eddie Kolek at my reception in Frankfurt. This is Baron Rüdiger von Rosen, the second in command to Karl Otto Pöhl. Rüdiger von Rosen had something very special. His forefathers were in this country in 1175 at the second crusade. I had to take him to Akko, where he showed me his family crest. 3 crossed roses. When you go to Akko, go to the chamber of the knights, and you see his family 1,000 years or 900 years ago with 3 crossed roses. This is Peltz, Arie Peltz. Arie, you know him, Pilz. And of course, the old man changing my name. That's the picture I just handed him, which is in his room in Zeboker. You can see it in the window, in a niche. And that's his son, Amos.